Good evening all and welcome to another collection of scary stories in the rain. Before we begin though, I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Emma. I hope you've had an amazing day. If you would like a birthday shout out, feel free to check out Patreon where you can find more information. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened to me and my boss, who also happens to be my stepdad, just last night. We are a courier service based in the UK. To start with, we had a little dark and secluded car park in a village in Dorset called Birdport to spend the night in the van, ready for an early arrival on our first job in the morning. We had done the usual, a cigarette, coffee, then climb into our bunks and got ready to sleep. It was around 3 a.m. and we hear a tap 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 on the passenger side window, but I shook it off, presuming it was a tree branch and the wind, and rolled over in my slumber. But there was another tap, followed by a cry, the plea of a child. "Please help, we're lost. Can you help us?" The voice sounded to be that of an 8 or 9-year-old girl. I looked up and wasn't instantly concerned for myself, but concerned about the child in question being out at that time in the morning, considering it was around 3:10 a.m. As I looked towards the window, I saw a young girl wearing a dark grey hoodie, standing at the side of the van with her head pointed down towards the floor. "Can we use your phone? We're lost." But that didn't seem to come from the girl I could see. I rubbed my eyes, presuming I was dreaming, and turned to my boss to see he was wide awake, his gaze fixated on his side window. Now let me tell you something about my boss, Trevor. He is the most skeptical person I know. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal, as he's a true believer in seeing is believing. I realized something was wrong with how he was acting, and I've never seen him look or even seem scared in the whole 3 years I've known him. So I looked up and saw another young girl, the one who was talking to us. "We need to use your phone. Let us use your phone." My first reaction was to ask him why you haven't answered, but as I was about to say this, he shook his head and stared at the young girl. I looked again, but boy do I wish I hadn't. Her eyes, they were, well, nothing, just black holes of pure, absolute emptiness. Not the eyes a little girl or anyone would bestow. I turned to look at the girl on my side of the van, and now she was looking at me with the exact same dark, empty eyes, but bearing a grin that made my blood run cold. You know the type of feeling when you get that cold shiver through your spine and it curls up to your toes? I noticed that she was shaking, meanwhile tapping. "Let us use your phone. Let us call our parents." All of this happened within about 90 seconds. I took a minute just to try and convince myself this wasn't actually happening, but the tapping continued, as did the "let us use your phone," but it was now more of a command. Just as I was about to shout, "No, go away," in the most stern way I could, the girl who was talking whistled, and the girl on my side of the van changed. Not physically, but she started growing, almost barking while running back and forth the length of the van. Then they turned around and walked away. I know most people won't believe me, but I've never had an experience like this before, and hope to God to never have one again. In the summer of 2012, I took a job as an expedition canoe guide on the boundary waters in northern Minnesota / Quetico, southern Ontario. There are massive wilderness areas of lakes and land. I was working for the Boy Scouts, and we were based on Moose Lake on the US side. My job was to facilitate a fun and safe multi-day trip, anywhere from 7 to 12 days out. Most of that summer was typical, but one expedition in particular still haunts me as the result of what happened to us over the course of a few days. Here is the full account. My crew was on the younger side. There were 9 of us in total, the maximum allowed in a group per our permit. There were 6 scouts, 2 adult supervisors or scoutmasters, and myself. They had wanted to do a 200-miler, but didn't have the physical ability, so we had to amend our route. They were bummed out, so I decided to take them to a waterfall called Eddy Falls. It's pretty flat up there, so a waterfall is somewhat rare. But that decision would end up putting us in the path of something. We visited the falls and camped near to it. That evening I had the boys work on a camp setup while the advisors worked on fire for dinner. I was collecting firewood in a big tangle of downed trees, brush and bramble. I could faintly hear the falls off to my left when out of nowhere I hear the most unearthly scream/roar I've ever heard. It stopped me dead in my tracks and I was frozen. The second scream was closer, and the third closer still. I couldn't see anything due to the thickness of the brush, but whatever this thing was, it was coming directly at me. By the fourth scream, I could feel it in my chest. I got nauseous and involuntarily barked at it. I've never before or since heard that sound come out of my body. The fifth scream almost physically hurt, but it snapped me back to reality and I ran back to camp. My crew had heard it too. But what am I to tell them? I claimed it was a boar. There's no boars up there, and the advisors knew I was lying but didn't call my bluff. After dinner they went to their tents and I retired to my hammock about 50 yards from the camp. As a rule, I always set my hammock at head height, so about 6 feet up. I was used to a tarp over my body and head to keep the morning dew off the mosquitoes, but the tarp wasn't strung up. That was important. It was just loosely over me. It must have been around 3 or 4 a.m. when I was awoken by what sounded like a woman sobbing. Not an outright cry, but a sob. At the same time, I heard something walking through the thick brush down past my feet. So I listen, totally still and quiet, as it crosses into camp. I could hear the change from brush to granite rock, but could still hear its heavy footfalls as it walked through the camp and on towards me. At this point, the tarp is still over my head, so I can't see a thing, and I don't know what to do. In no time, it was standing right next to me. I could hear it breathing, loud and congested. I could smell the musk. I could feel its enormous presence only inches from my body, just standing there. Time to make a decision. I threw off the tarp from my head and did this as my left hand touched the thing in the chest. It was dark, but I could make out briefly a very large upright figure. The hair on it was long and coarse. The musculature was impressive. Bodybuilder status, pectorals is what I touched. It happened in a second. As soon as my hand made contact, it bolted back into the brush with immense speed for such thick debris. By the time I got my headlamp on, it was gone. My crew had slept through it all, so I read until the sun came up and decided not to mention it. The next day we moved on a few miles towards base camp and camped on a small island. Campsites on the US side are designated by a fire pit and a grumper, which is a fiberglass toilet over a deep hole. We were just arriving, and it was evening. One of the adult advisors needed to visit the grumper, so he walked towards it. About 2 minutes later, we heard him yelling as he came running back to camp, still pulling his pants up, and said that he'd seen a gorilla run right in front of him. I asked if maybe it was a bear, and he said it absolutely was not. He'd hunted bears for years, and it was no bear. It was a monkey, and it was around 9 feet tall. At this height estimate, I imagine being back in my hammock. If I'd have touched the chest and I was 6 feet off the ground, that puts its head close to 9 feet up. Was it stalking us? Was there more than one? The boys were now scared. Time to mitigate. I suggested a night paddle. No one's sleeping anymore anyway, so we pack up and set out around 8 p.m. and paddled by headlamp for several miles. My plan was to get back on Moose Lake and camp very near to base so that we could be the first crew off the water the following day. Moose Lake is connected to Newfound Lake by a small pinch and a channel of water that's not very deep nor wide. There are dark woods on both sides, and we were right in the middle of the pinch when a rock, the size of a basketball, came flying out of the woods on the right side and narrowly missed the bow of the canoe I was steering. This thing was forcefully throwing things at us from the tree line. At this, we paddled like hell. We paddled to the center of Moose Lake, tied all 3 canoes together, and sat out there all night. With the sunrise, we paddled to base camp and ended our expedition. They did not want to talk about what happened, and I was okay with that. They left for Oklahoma the next day. After they left, I went to work a shift in the canoe yard helping crews offload. My buddy Justin got back that day from a trip in the same area we had been in, Bear Loop, and I was helping him put a boat on the rack when I noticed he had a distant, almost 1,000-yard stare sort of look. I asked him how his trip went, and he said it was all good until they hit Knife Lake/Newfound Lake. He said they were being messed with for 2 nights on Knife, and they had a rock thrown at them in Newfound Pinch. Sure enough, for a solid 2 weeks after the crews kept coming back from that area, they all had very similar stories. One night there was a crowd of us guides in the staff lodge swapping trail stories, and these encounters came up one after another. Screams, rocks, sightings of apes. Then from the back corner of the room I heard a chuckle. It was one of the old veteran guides who'd been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It's about time someone else seen one." I asked how long he'd known they were there, and he said he's been encountering them for 10 years. Then he said, "They talk to me." It shocked me. What, like language? Nah. They communicate telepathically. The less you acknowledge them, the less they'll bother you. But they can read you, and they like it when you're afraid. It's a game to them. What happened out there is still a very big question in my mind. I've always been open to the idea of Sasquatch. Their existence was never really a huge stretch for me. But what really sticks with me is the way the veteran guides spoke of their intelligence and parapsychological abilities, that they can read human emotions as clear as the pages in a book, that they know our species better than we know ourselves. I was on a ferry for a school softball trip off Kodiak Island, Arkansas, in 2014. I was 18 at the time. A whole bunch of us had snuck up the deck around 11 p.m. to watch the waves and smoke a cigarette, and we'd and generally be teenagers on a boat without supervision. It must have been 11 p.m. in May in Alaska, so the sun was thinking about setting, but was still quite bright outside. So we're doing our thing when we notice a pod of orcas swimming with the ferry's wake, which is very cool, but not unusual. If you're familiar with the dimension of an orca fin, you know they're about 4 to 6 feet in height and look like a big black spike coming out the water. They travel and hunt in pods, anywhere between 15 to 40. The beautiful demon murderers of the sea, top of the food chain. We saw a pod of orcas, counted them to be around 15 or so with some babies scattered in there too. Very fun to watch. Took them a good 30 minutes to go by. We tried to get pictures, but it was too dark with our phones at the time. Another 30 or 4 minutes go by, and we've all pretty much sobered up, and it's about to get dark, and we're cold and sleepy and about ready to go in. No more orcas have been seen in about a half hour, and then one of my JV girls spots another one. So we all turn around and look, but one dorsal fin is immediately followed by another, and another, and another, and then 2 more, and then 2 more after that, in 2 separate rows, and they're taller by a lot, and jagged. Like some have whole chunks torn out of them. They're all 8 to 10 feet high, and they're all attached to one creature. And we can just barely see its back slicing through the water, covered in these rows of spikes. And it just keeps coming. This thing is like 20 to 30 feet away from the ferry, running parallel to it, and we are transfixed. There's like 9 or 10 of us, and no one is saying a word.
because we've all turned to look at a whale, and we're now watching something that is horrifically terrifying, obviously not a whale. Someone tries to take a picture, but it's too dark, and at this point the only reason we can see this thing is the light cast from the ferry's portholes. Tale as old as time when it comes to things you really wish you had a picture of. But as we stand there completely scared, in awe, we see this thing keep surfacing for a good 6 or 7 minutes, which means whatever it was long, like 60 to 70 feet or longer, and covered in enormous spikes. Spikes that look like they've won thousands of battles with God knows what. It took what felt like an eternity for any of us to say anything after the last of it disappeared back into the strait. I mean, if you and 8 of your friends had seen the exact same thing, that all science had definitely pointed to not existing, and you had all seen the exact same thing at the exact same time, and it being very obviously trailing or hunting 15 or something other apex predators, what do you even say to break the silence? That's the thing that eats me about the whole thing. It was hunting. It was following them. It was literally hunting about 60 tons of toothy, angry, intelligent apex predator. Every once in a while, one of us will hit another one up and check in and be like, "Do you remember this? Was I hallucinating? Did we all see the same insane, worldview melting, terrifying thing that night?" And the reason I know we did is because none of us spoke about it after that. Not during the trip, not after, not to any of our friends, because how the hell do you tell someone about something like that? Now it's been almost 10 years between us, and I assume some of them have probably told people. I know I tell people, because I've seen a lot of stuff like that in Alaska, and also because there's a very rich history among native Alaskans of a something that lives and hunts in the waters around Kodiak, and it's important to tell its story, because someday it's going to eat a little too much plastic, and no one will ever watch it hunt a pod of orcas from a boat again. I consider myself to be a rather skeptical person, and have written off most of cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as straight bunk up until the following event. It was the late summer of 2005 in Northeast Ohio. I was heading into my junior year of high school and was spending the night over at my best friend's house. And we decided for the hell of it to crash outside for the night with just sleeping bags. It was a peaceful enough night. The weather was nice, balmy warmth. The air rang with the pleasant symphonies of crickets and far-off spring peepers. The skies couldn't have been more clear, as it was that special sort of feeling in the air where you were far enough away from the last time it rained that it didn't feel heavy anymore, and actually felt inviting, as opposed to humid and miserable. This was as close to picturesque as summers could get. Everything was blanketed in the dark blue elegance of the evening light. Falling asleep was easy enough. This was a year that mosquitoes were remarkably in pretty low numbers, making sleeping unprotected with just a sleeping bag very simple. Eventually, as bad luck would have it, I had to answer my call to nature, so I roused from my sleep to do so. My buddy's yard was a fairly large-sized one, with an area of woods bordering most of it. After finishing, I staggered back over to my sleeping bag and noticed my friend was not in his. We were staged a few feet apart in case a bear came and got someone in the middle of the night or something. It would leave enough time for the other one to run to safety. You know, bro stuff. In any case, I catch him in my peripheral vision, just kind of standing along the side of a shed that was in his yard. I wasn't kidding when I said this night was picturesque. The sky was so unnaturally clear that the starlight and what little of the crescent moon we had left led to quite a bit of light despite being in the dead of night. However, the area we chose to pee, with the shed, included to be nestled along the part of the yard with the thickest trees,
leading to a large portion of the yard still being under heavy shadow. Kinda funny when you think about it. Having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night when you're expecting everything to be dark. Oh, have I mentioned that at this point, everything was also suspiciously quiet? The idyllic chirping of the frogs and crickets that have earlier ushered me to sleep was now nowhere to be heard. I hadn't realized it when I first woke up to do my business, but it was quiet the whole time since I woke. Honestly, the fact that it was so quiet may have been why I woke up in the first place, on top of answering nature's call. Focusing my attention back on my friend, I noticed that he was still standing by the shed. He was around the corner away from me, so I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it seemed as if he was done doing his business as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you just doing standing around here?" I ask, as I circle around behind him and approach to his left. I didn't even need to wait for an answer before I immediately saw what had him frozen. Roughly 30 feet away, hidden among the thicker area of the forest in the yard, way back behind the shed, it stood. I'm not the greatest with words, so please bear with me. I will try to describe as best as I can what befell my eyes. This creature was perhaps a few inches taller than myself and stood at least 6 foot. However, that's where the similarities end. It stood on 2 legs with a hunched posture, as it appeared to have had its shoulders raised up, with its head leaning slightly forward. It had arms, but the forearms were a bit longer than the upper arms, culminating into a sickly-looking hand, with long points almost like claws. Though bathed in starlight and shadow, I could discern the skin of the beast was a dark, greyish colour. The head itself was mostly obscured by shadow, but retained a general humanoid appearance. I could not make out a mouth or jaw though. However, one unnerving thing about the head was that its eyes glowed red. While perhaps glow was a bit of a sensationalization, it actually looked more like the red-eye effect from old photos, but it definitely illuminated the immediate area around the eye socket, so perhaps illuminate is the better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin that there was no way that it was just a neighbor messing with us, as it didn't seem physically possible for something so thin to even be able to support weight on such a frame. And then it started moving. At this point, my fight or flight response told me to get the hell out of there, but I stood frozen in fear. The beast, already a horrific bastardization of the human form, now grotesquely bobbed its body up and down as if attempting to take off in flight. I didn't notice it before, but there appeared to be a sort of cape behind its back. I say cape, but it appeared to be ragged, a fleshy texture, as if the skin on its back was flayed off and it was dragging behind its arms. This sickening flesh cape waved with each flap of its arms, giving the illusion of wings. But that wasn't even the worst part. It emitted a noise, not a growl, nor roar, nor scream. The sound it made was akin to a raspy inhale, like someone deeply out of breath. However, this wasn't like that. There was a sort of reverb to this breathing. It echoed quietly, yet still managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones. Each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul, as you are already frozen in fear. This dance felt like it went on for hours, but in reality, only a few brief moments passed. Our bodies finally made enough adrenaline that we were able to finally bolt and sprint to his house. We spoke about it for the next few days following, but after a point, we just didn't feel like reliving it anymore until we researched what cryptids were and settled on the idea we came across one, and decided people would think we were full of it, and opted to not keep talking about it anymore. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered, but this experience has subconsciously kept me terrified of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, last weekend my wife and kids and I went camping at a state campground, and it was the first time I had been outside at night in the woods since that day, and I was terrified all night. Thankfully nothing happened, and we had a nice weekend, but it's crazy that this experience affected me for so many years. My wife was the only other person I shared this experience with, and at first she laughed it off, thinking I was kidding, until she saw how solemn I got when I spoke about it, and that it wasn't a joke to me. She then confided in me that she too had experienced something paranormal, so that's fun too. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Hopefully I was able to convey it properly. Superficially, I would say it resembled what people have described what the Mothman looked like, but I never saw it take flight, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as bright as reports made it out to. The wings only looked like wings when it was flapping its arms, and I doubt it could have actually flown with that raggedy skin flap. But I'm not going to stay and figure it out. Others say that it was some kind of crawler, but I suppose I'll never know. I'm a skeptic of the supernatural, but I believe anything is possible. I won't discount supernatural occurrences if I can't find a logical explanation for them. I've experienced a few incidents I couldn't explain, but I'm going to tell you about the one that freaked me out the most. I live in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota, USA. A lot of people in the cities have cabins in either northern Minnesota or rural Wisconsin. Our cabin was in rural Wisconsin, in a small town called Danbury. The cabin is on a long lake, at the very end of Long Lake Road, and along with the cabin came an almost entire acre of land, covered by thick forest. We carved a trail through the land for ATVs and whatnot, so the scene is set. Now, about me. I'm an outdoors enthusiast and have been forever. I'm 6'4", fit, and have been a hunter since I was 12. I know my environment, the wildlife, and the forest well. I'm typically comfortable in the woods. I come from a military family and am trained in multiple forms of combat, armed and unarmed. I also have extensive firearms training, and as a result I'm fairly confident in my abilities to defend myself. I'm not really scared of people. Big predators, on the other hand, like bears, wolves, man-bear, pig, whatever, I'm not a big fan of. This brings me to the wilderness. I'm 23 now, but at the time of the incident I was 16. Even at 16, I was a decent hunter and had good common sense. Anyway, I was at the cabin with my cousins and my grandparents. It was the middle of summer, I think July. My cousins and I were shooting at each other with airsoft guns, and we had a full-on battle going on through the property, including the woods, which were my stalking grounds. I was wearing my BDUs with face cover, as well as camo head to toe. Our battle ended up about 100 yards northwest of the cabin, into the woods. We ended the war on the main trail and were standing and talking about the events that had transpired. I was still on guard, because I always am. I suppose I could be considered a tad paranoid. Alright, so we were standing there talking when I noticed something move at our 12 o'clock, about 50 meters out. I got quiet and focused, dead ahead scanning. My cousin was still talking, so I whispered, "Shh," so he shut up. I figured the movement I had seen was just a bird. As a joke, and to freak him out, I told him we were being watched. That's when I noticed that the woods were dead quiet. Not a bird chirping, no insect sounds, nothing. And I realized that only happened when there's a big predator. So I look even closer. That's when I saw it. At my 12 o'clock was a large animal. It had reddish-brown fur and almost blended in perfectly until I focused on it. It had long, front limbs, arm-like, with what appeared to be formidable claws, and it was standing kind of slouched down against a tree, like it was trying to be stealthy. Even though it was standing like that, it was nearly as tall as me. The only reason I saw it was because of the teeth. I think it was panting, because its whitish teeth were visible. Its snout appeared to be a tad elongated. I couldn't get a better look because my first thought was, we have to go. I even said it out loud. My cousin was already freaked, but when I said those words, he bolted up the trail towards the cabin. He nearly left me in the dust, because instead of running when he did, I waited a good 3 seconds as I was being protected of him, keeping my eye on it until I saw it move, and it was fast. That's when I ran like hell. I didn't see which way it went. All I knew was that I heard it crashing through the woods. My cousin stopped at the shed, which was still 50 meters from the cabin, to wait for me. When I caught up, I yelled to go, and we both bolted to the cabin. We entered and shut the door. My grandma asked why we looked so panicked and had slammed the door shut. I knew they wouldn't believe me, so I said we'd seen a bear. My cousin nodded. Later that night, after my grandparents went to sleep, we spoke about it, and I asked my cousin if he had seen it. He told me that he had paused for a second to look back, after we ran, to see if it was running with him. He said he had mostly just seen a flash of fur, and went on to say he thought it wasn't the right color to be a bear. I also agreed that it wasn't the right color to be one, and told him that we only had black bears in the area, and that it wasn't built like a bear either. I told him I never thought it was a bear. He asked me why I had lied about it to my grandparents. I told him they wouldn't have believed us, and we kept it between the two of us until now. Still, the animal didn't match any known regional animal profile in the area, and I'm at a loss for what it might have been. I do know that it was stalking us though, and that it was built like an athletic predator, not like a bear. It wasn't as heavy set. After the incident, neither of us would go into the woods on foot alone without a gun. We generally only went back into the woods on ATVs from that point on. I always loved that cabin, up until then. Fortunately now, it has been sold.
This must have happened at least 10 years ago now. Let me give you some context. Back then, I worked at a cinema, and our cinema usually held these special midnight screenings for avid moviegoers who simply couldn't wait till the next night for a particular movie to come out. We only did it for ones that we knew would bring in an audience and, of course, money. I happened to be one of those unfortunate few who was drafted in the roster to be in attendance that night, not only to make sure the movie went well and stand behind the candy counter, but to clean up when everyone had left. So I knew I wasn't going to be getting home until at least 3:34 a.m., the making of a great night. I can't remember which film in question was actually playing, but I knew it was a Marvel one, as those tended to rack up the dollars which we needed to stay open, and as a small independent cinema, it was vital for my boss. So anyway, let me take you back. The movie had just ended, and everyone was making their way out. I remember feeling like absolute crap and wanting nothing more than to go home and pass out, as I was being sustained on coffee and sugar, a combination I do not recommend when still at work. Everyone had left the building, and I went to get my leaf blower to start blowing all the popcorn out of all the aisles. It's a fun job at first, but gets boring quite quickly. I remember seeing a huge spill of Coke all over the floor, and the thing with Coke is it gets very sticky if you leave it long enough. That was going to be fun later, as I was the one in charge of cleaning this particular theatre. We were working a skeleton crew because my boss didn't want more people than necessary to have to cope with being up that late. As I was cleaning up, I hear one of my co-workers close the front door and shout to me that everyone has left. Standard procedure. That person then does a sweep of the entire facility to make sure that no one has been left behind or is hiding. You'd be surprised how many people choose to do this, thinking they can, well, I'm not entirely sure, stay a night in a cinema or stay a night in the cinema to then wake up the next morning and watch loads of movies for free. I heard that it does happen in some places. Anyway, I was just cleaning up when I needed to go grab a mop, and as I went to the storage cupboard to grab it, I heard a tap on the recently closed door. I look over and see a small girl of around 10 in a dark hoodie staring at me through the door. Now it was quite dark and I couldn't see her all that well because of the glare and the reflection from the inside. So I shout over to her, "We're closed, honey, go be with your parents." She doesn't say a word, but continues tapping with her fingernail on the door. I look over to her and say, "If you've left something, I'm afraid you're gonna have to get it tomorrow. I haven't found anything yet and I'm still doing the cleaning." At this point, my co-worker walks in, so I tell him to deal with the girl, grab my mop, and go over to deal with that spilled Coke. Great. This is going to be a fun night. After about 10 minutes, and satisfied with my work, the theatre being as clean as it's going to get, I start making my way to put the mop back and hopefully just do my last few checks before I can leave for the night. I go and look around for my co-worker and he's no longer there, but I do see the girl is just idly standing and staring in the doorway. I tell myself that I'm busy and that I don't have time for this girl, but then I realize it's like 3 a.m. What the hell is a little girl doing here? I assumed that her family must have told her to go grab whatever it was that she'd left behind, but nothing was in the theatre. I look up at the girl and shout to her, "Is there anything you left? I just cleaned the theatre, I couldn't find anything." But there's no reply. I try and look at her, but there's something wrong with her eyes, I can't really tell. It's almost like I can't see them. Weird. I assume it's because of the glare of the inside lights and the pure darkness from the outside. She taps on the window again just as I turn around to put away the mop. "Please help me." I turn over to her. "What's wrong, honey? What do you need?" "Please let me in. It's cold." Now that wasn't true. It was a particularly warm night if I remember correctly, which then made me wonder why the hell she was wearing a hoodie. I certainly wouldn't be. I can't do that. We're closed. But if you need or have forgotten anything, you can come back tomorrow, okay? Why don't you go find your parents, yeah?" I was met with silence again. I put the mop away, and as I do so and close the door, she's gone. Great, I think to myself. She's gone. I can finally finish everything up and go. I start doing the final checks, and just as I'm turning some lights off, I hear a sob. It's my co-worker. "Darren? Darren, what the hell are you doing?" Darren was on the floor of the candy counter. I hadn't actually noticed him before, whimpering slightly. I asked him what's wrong, and he said, "The little girl, there's something wrong with her." He babbled, I didn't even understand what he was saying. So I picked him up, told him that she's gone, and to not be afraid of a little girl. We grab our bags, and just as we're about to leave through the staff fire exit, do we hear another tapping on the door, this time more pronounced. I see the little girl again. I see the street light from this angle illuminating behind her, and I tell her one more time, "Sorry honey, we're closed, we're going now." She looks at me, tilting her head and as I flip off the light switch, I see no eyes. There's just a jet blackness where her eyes should be. I stare intently for a moment at this girl, without saying a word. My co-worker grabs me by the arm and tugs. I take one look back to see this girl still standing there at the window. I try and tell him that we should probably go around or call the police to tell them that there's a girl there, but he isn't having any of it. Hushes me and says, "There's something wrong with that child." And we leave through the door. I live in this town, so I came on a bicycle. He came in a car. I jump on my bike and cycle as fast as I've ever cycled before. Unsettling feeling looming in my stomach. I knew something was up with that child. I just didn't know what. A few months pass, and I hadn't seen the child since. But I get talking with some friends at the bar, and one of them tells me about a story that they heard about a child with black eyes. As he's telling the story, I slowly start to fill with a greater sense of dread, as I realize what he's saying is something that happened to me. Not the same, of course, but a child with dark eyes asking to be let in. It sounds cliché. I just thought the girl was lost or wanted something from the cinema. Hell, she could have been homeless, I don't know. I try to rationalize everything, as I'm a complete skeptic. But my heart definitely skipped a few beats as he recounted the story that he had heard. I didn't choose to volunteer what I had seen at the time, and my coworker Daryl had actually left employment since then, so he couldn't validate for me. I just kept quiet and pretended to myself like whatever happened hadn't happened. I don't know if his story was true or not. All that I know is what I saw that night, and I really hope to never encounter it again. Years ago, me and my cousin hung out a lot, drinking and smoking and playing video games. He lived in the last house on the right, down a dead-end road in an area where it was somewhat suburban and somewhat country. He had a river run right behind his house. It wasn't huge but had a decent current, and on the other side of the river there was a small island and a river on the other side of that. It was shaped a bit like a triangle. One day he calls me and tells me to come over and hang out, as he was scared, and I asked him what happened. He began telling me that his dog was freaking out the night before by growling and snarling and barking. Usually this dog was dead silent, unless she had to go out and then she would whine a little. He said he kept hearing splashes while he was outside, like someone was throwing rocks into the water, and before the splashing his dog began freaking out. So I go over there. We're hanging outside out back smoking a cigarette and talking. His dog starts sniffing around like crazy and then looks at the island and goes nuts. Me and him turn on our phone's flashlight and start checking out the island to see if we could see anything. We're scanning the island back and forth and we both go, "Bro, did you see that?" A big-ass pair of red eyes was staring at us, and I remember we just froze and crapped bricks. So the island is pretty much the same level as his backyard, and these eyes were at least 4 to 5 feet in the air. We proceed to watch these eyes raise about 8 or 9 feet above the ground, and both of us got nervous thinking it was a bear. What was this thing? The eyes then vanished, and we heard the thing move around the island heavily. His dog began whimpering and whining, and out of nowhere, huge rocks started being thrown at us, like stones the size of pumpkins hitting the water, and for the next hour and a half we heard this thing move back and forth through the trees and throwing things into the water. And then suddenly it just stopped and went silent. I must mention that this house is old as hell, and we're pretty sure it's haunted because it constantly sounds like someone is slamming doors and stomping around the house, when it would just be me and him, and the doors would be locked. We also heard faint talking there when no one else was in the house. To this day we don't know what it was. We initially thought it was a bear because there were a few bear sightings in the area, but how would a bear throw mini boulders into the water like that? There were no bear sounds either. It was completely silent out that night with no birds, no frogs, and no crickets. Safe to say, we were both terrified, and it's a night neither of us will ever forget in a hurry. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, tree frogs, and cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog would not accompany me outside. Now, my dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world, but not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked at me as if, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was there was complete silence. Still shrugged it off, I walked down to my front steps and went to the car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden I heard one of my hedges next to me that linked the walkway to our front door rattle. At first I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had just seen one earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock about the size of a cantaloupe landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out, "Whoever you are, this is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned and started walking back towards my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A few weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now at this point I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This was around 9 p.m. My wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing it is. Me, growing up in Oregon, I loved the rain. And for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year worth of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing she loved going outside and watching it. So for us it was an enjoyable experience. Except that this night in particular things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stopped me and said, "Did you hear that?" "No. What did you hear?" She goes to say, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods." "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of listening intently, she goes, "There it is again." I tell her I didn't hear a thing. "You sure you're just not hearing things?" I say. She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It sounded like our son. I think he's out there and got lost." "No, he's asleep on the couch." We both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said it was weird, that she could have sworn it sounded just like him. Anyway, she stands up and says, Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him. Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you know she's absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking in them in the daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently, dear, and there's no one calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention at this point, she's 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. What if there's someone's child out lost in the woods? Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. And secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles. The odds of them being lost 100 feet from our home when it's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil. Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again. "No, get in the house." I don't know what's going on, but we need to get inside. We both go in. I don't know what happened, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, as it was just getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So, to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of the house. I asked her what she's doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you decide to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She looks out into the woods and says, "See, there it is again." I couldn't hear anything. But what I notice is that it's completely silent out again. I told her that the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our home are slim, and that she needs to get back inside. "What if someone left a baby out there?" she says. Well, if that were true, I would hear it. Now at this point I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health, and asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were on our front porch. It was early evening and I had just mowed the lawn, and our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. Now he knows that he's not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be very careful, as lots of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we're talking, we both keep an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took around 8 seconds, as all that we said were "how are things" and "good," and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their school teachers. "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over to where our son was and he was gone. I called out his name, ran over to the side of the house, and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish that pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods, and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel, or something that warranted a closer investigation. I walked him back up to the front of the house and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I wrote this off as him being curious, as most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but not quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we've had just laid them down for the night and had a loud bang on the side of the house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I couldn't see anything. Now the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns outside to investigate, but it was dead silent. The floodlight that's outside my house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the other end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light intently. As I approached the backside of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed were that my 3 dogs that were in the area weren't making a peep. Now our dogs have no filter, and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden, the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said okay, as long as the dogs were fine. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this very instance, every time there's nothing going on outside. There have always been times where we were sitting in the house and I was watching a movie, when my wife walks over to me and will ask, "Did you call me?" I say no, and she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She says that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, when I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table, doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now our back patio seats are about 20 feet off the ground, and it's like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for a barbecue. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make the sound out. Again, I kept thinking I was going crazy, but as you will see, I think of all of this tied into the final moments where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before I get into what happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. So when you're at the downrange, you have woods surrounding you on all sides except back up to my shop. I have to say it has always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing, when you're down there alone. It feels like you're miles from anyone. One day at around 5 in the evening, I was sighting a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened, while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling that something or someone was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers on my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped from a tree. Now, if you've been in Tennessee woods, you'll know that a lot of branches fall off trees randomly out of nowhere. This is nothing new. Except this time it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood. I turned and looked again but couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. As I turned around, I saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out the bushes had freaked me out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds of the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want to freak her out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over the summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store about a mile from our house, and I just saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different size and color. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The colour was a golden green, but they resembled the mannerisms of a large cat and felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting the bags from the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house excited to see me. As I was waiting for my niece to help carry in her bag, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at, and it was my neighbor's property from across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up at night. Up until this point, I've always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes, even with what has happened to me the year prior. I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre of lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then when it came out into the clear, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was tall, very tall, but what was strange was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in the front of the shed, I swear I could see through it. But what was strange was the distance it covered very quickly, and that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. What the hell? I realized it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving as quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized whatever it was striding towards us. I told my niece to get in the house. I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still getting stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me, but I still watched over her without saying a word. As she was walking slowly, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted. She ran in up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was as pale as a ghost. She said she heard something big in the woods, walking loudly on the leaves, and when she turned towards it, she heard a deep guttural growl. I asked her why she didn't come with me when I told her, and she said that she thought I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, but she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. At this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something grey and hairy bolt from behind the SUV, back across the street into the woods. My porch is raised. Like our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this thing was cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was wanted my niece. It then jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and leaned forwards as if to see something. I asked her what she saw, and she turned and ran back up the porch with a terrified look on her face. She said it was a figure hiding inside the tree, and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all that she could say was that it was a dull red, but as she got closer it looked dead. I asked what she meant by dead, and she said that the pupils were grey like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark grey, and she swears she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go outside again, but it was a bad idea. Looking from the stairs, it appeared to be a tall humanoid-shaped being, ominous as hell. The next morning we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it standing over, and it put its height around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this might have been the Glimmerman / a crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said it felt like the thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing online, the more everything that has been happening over these past years makes sense. Like my wife wanting to go outside, hearing my son cry for help, the baby, my son going out, the dogs being scared. It all makes sense. A lot of properties down our road are undeveloped, unowned land. And on one of the trees there's a large old sign that says "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw the sign I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered the property, or teenagers put it up to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything. It's just pure forest. Now that you understand the story, I doubt this is the end. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to vanish one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, do we really want to make them missing 411 cases? I feel perplexed and scared. Does anyone have any advice?
About 5 years ago, when I was 15, I would frequently walk home from school with a few friends through a wooded area, which was on a steep hill. We had explored the area for a decent amount of time, as we had been walking that way since we were all 13. Next to the forest there was a field, with a wire fence round 2 sides of it, blocking off the forest. The fence had a human-sized hole in it, which we explored a few months before, that led through bushes to what we believed was an abandoned homeless person's camp, complete with a badly built shelter out of a tarp and crates, a few plastic chairs, and a small pit in the middle. We went there a few times to show people, and it always stayed pretty much in the exact same spot, except the chairs would move positions every so often, and sometimes be thrown into the bushes. We went here often but never saw anyone. To get to our houses we would have to walk from the fields up the steep hill to the forest to get to the top to where the houses are. It was late spring. A few friends and I were walking home after school as normal. It was a pretty nice day, so we thought we'd explore the woods rather than heading straight home. We were exploring for a decent amount of time, maybe an hour or so, just walking through bushes, trying to find other paths or open areas. We walked through a thick bush and discovered we had accidentally walked into the homeless person's camp area. We were all confused, as we'd never gotten to it from this angle, only through the fence. But something felt off, like a kind of sinking feeling. My friends didn't share that feeling. One of them was tired from walking, so decided to sit on one of the plastic chairs and eat some food he'd brought earlier, whilst me and my other friend just walked around the camp, seeing if anything had changed. We walked into the covered bit and could smell something pretty grim, but couldn't exactly figure out what it was. One of my friends thought it was a dead body and decided to look further in, while I went back out to speak to the other. I was still pretty freaked out. One of my friends was gone for a few minutes until he called for us to come and see what he found. We refused, so he came out all annoyed and called us names, pulling up his phone to show us pictures of a dead rat. The rat looked rotten and torn apart. He said he found it right at the back in a corner. Either way, we found it creepy and decided to just leave it. I wanted to go through the fence and walk around the forest, but the other two said it would take way too long and that we may just as well walk quickly up the hill through the forest so that they could all get home. I decided to go with them. I didn't really fancy going home alone. We went back the way we came, with that feeling kind of dropping. My friends were just joking around, trying not to think about the rat, when we didn't notice that one of our friends fell behind. As we were walking through, the friend that stayed behind kept saying he saw something, but we kind of just took the piss out of him, saying he was seeing things, but he was certain he saw something, and was starting to sound distressed. The friend that was still up with me jokingly shouted something along the lines of, "If you're here to kill us, do it already, my leg hurts." And we had a decent laugh, until my friend, Liam, at the bottom, started having a full-on panic attack and began to cry. We went over to make sure he was alright, and that's when I saw something a few meters away. An all-black figure behind a tree. But it wasn't a person in all black or anything like that. It was dark. I could see its shape, looking like an elongated person shape, with fingers that were long and wide, holding onto the tree. I thought it was a shadow or something, but I could see that it was 3D. I stood staring for a few seconds with it also not moving. I felt like a deer in headlights, until my other friend, Marnie, started shouting on whatever it was. I still didn't move. Marnie dragged us. He was bawling his eyes out. We got far enough away at that point that we just decided to turn around and run. I really couldn't run that much, as I felt as I'd had all the energy drained from me. I turned back around and the thing had barely moved, now leaning more from the tree with its long, thin arms by its side. We kept going. We were quite out of breath but tried to jog. When we got to the road at the top of the hill, we fell to the ground from exhaustion, staring at the forest. I think Marnie started filming the forest, shouting something, but I can't remember what. Nothing really came after us. We went home, making sure to stick to the main roads. Even though we had school the next day, my friends and I decided to stay at my house and talk about what we saw, and draw pictures of it. We told my mum and she didn't exactly believe us, but said she would drop us to school and pick us up the next day to make us feel a bit better. We spoke about it with mates, but they just blew us off, as if we were trying to make something up. We looked through the video footage but didn't see anything. We would each claim to see it again, but could not really validate it, as it was never clear as it was the first time, seeing it from car windows when driving near, or whilst walking to the shop by the field after school. To this day, me and my friends have not returned to that forest. I don't think Marnie has gone back to the forest, but I haven't spoken to them for a while since high school. But that long black figure always remains in my mind. It still messes me up whenever I walk home in the dark. About 2 years ago, I had my first encounter with something I can't explain. And the reason I'm writing this is because I saw some strange footprints yesterday, where I encountered this 2 years ago. I live in Finland near the coast. 2 years ago I was hunting, and it was getting late and dark, so I decided to head back home. I had about a 2 to 3 kilometer walk through the forest to get to my car. It had gotten pitch black outside at this point, and I had a headlamp for light as I walked. As I was walking, I kept hearing unusually loud sounds. Now I knew something big was moving, and I was 100% sure it was a moose, as I've encountered lots of them in the forest, and they do make a lot of noise when they walk. I couldn't see anything though, and it was getting closer, when all of a sudden, I met with this horrific smell. It sounded like crap and garbage had mixed together, really rotten. My hair was standing on end, so I raised my shotgun as my whole body instinctively tells me to run. But I stand still and listen. As the sound gets closer, I see what looks like a humanoid figure standing on 2 feet, really tall. It had to be at least 2 meters tall, but slender and muscular at the same time, and kind of crouched in its posture. It looked almost like a werewolf from the movies, but at the same time not. It was quite far away. My light didn't go that far and I could hardly see it, but its eyes shined red from my headlamp. It looked at me for about 3 seconds, made no sound. It was breathing weirdly, and I think it could smell the 2 ducks that I'd hunted in my backpack. It slowly walked away. I even filmed a bit of it as it began walking with my phone, but it's potato quality, as my phone at the time was an old Samsung S2, and it was dark, so you really can't see it, just hear lots of noise. I told some friends and fellow hunters, and a couple have heard and seen strange things, but nothing like this. Is this a creature or something paranormal?
The story happened earlier this year, Thanksgiving 2015. Like any holiday, there were lots of neighbors hosting parties with their families and random kids running around and playing outside, which I guess is one of the reasons I was foolish as I was that day. The sun was going down, and I was home alone watching TV and eating some turkey when I heard a knock at the door. I looked at the clock, and it was almost 7:30. Thinking it was one of my neighbors, I swung the door open without even thinking, and there stood 2 kids. One of them was a little boy with a baseball cap on and blue jeans and a jersey, and the other one was younger and shorter with no cap and looking towards the floor. I looked down at them and asked if they needed anything, and the older boy chirped, "Yes, we need to come in and get our baseball from your yard." As soon as he said that, a chill went down my spine. I had a horrible feeling that I should not let these boys in. I looked at him, studying his face, and in the back of my head, I knew something was wrong but couldn't quite place it. He must have noticed my hesitation because he exclaimed, "Come on, ma'am, we just want our ball back." And that's when I realized this child had no whites in his eyes. I was kind of shocked and flabbergasted. At first I thought they were black contact lenses, and I looked over at his brother and noticed he had the same eyes. My face must have given it away, because as soon as I looked to the leader, his eyes filled with hatred, and his smile turned to an evil smirk. I swear he stood taller and more confident, staring into my eyes with that smile, and hinted that he knew what I was thinking. From that moment, the atmosphere changed from what I perceived to be the beginning of an encounter as 2 normal and innocent boys standing in front of me, wanting their ball back, to 2 inhuman beings, wanting to invade my home and create havoc on my life. I stared at him. The smaller boy stood firmly and confidently on 2 feet as he got taller. He also stared. After about 30 seconds of staring, the smaller boy broke the silence. "Come on, ma'am. Just let us in." The way they said it, I could tell something changed in him because he spoke with so much conviction in his voice. I stared at him and he smirked. All knowingly, I didn't know what to say. In my head, I wanted to scream and call them out. Tell them they were demons from another world and to get off my porch, but at the same time, I began to wonder about my safety. If I did that, it would only be worse for me. I mean, what if, instead of just asking to come in, they force their way into my life? What if they get violent? I thought to myself, this charade we're playing by pretending this isn't what it is, if I don't play this game, it could be detrimental to my own health and well-being. I made the decision to keep playing and looked at the smaller of the 2 beings and said, "Yeah, I'll get it for you." I grabbed the door and slammed it in their face and began walking. Turned on all the lights, sat on my couch with my feet pulled up to my chin, and began to shake and rock back and forth and listen. But I heard nothing. No laughter outside, no children playing, no shuffling at my door, no further knocks, no anything. The world fell at a standstill, and I sat there silently in the fetal position, and then heard a slow knock at my door. I stopped rocking and stood still, listening intently for another knock. I didn't know what to do. I stared at the door and listened as another knock came through, but I refused to get up. My body was stiff and my arms so tightly wrapped around my legs I could feel the veins in my arms pumping blood. And the slow knock continued for at least 2 minutes, followed by silence so ear-piercing I wondered if I'd lost my hearing. The entire night went by, and I sat in my living room not knowing what to do. I don't know when I dozed off, but I woke up at around 2 a.m. and the lights were off in my house. The TV screen that was once on Comedy Central now filled with black and white static. I don't know how, but I think something made its way into my home. The following events happened at 5 p.m. on the west coast of Sweden. Given the time, and it being winter, the darkness had nearly taken control when my dad and I went for a walk in a forest that was perhaps a 10-minute stroll from civilization, and without any light assistance. There were no street lights or flashlights involved. We saw the trail fairly clearly though, as we often took walks together and were very familiar with it. We were right next to a lake, and we noticed a big group of maybe 50 ducks chilling in the water near the beach. When out of nowhere, about 25 meters away from us, a creature ran from across the trail from left to right and continued down towards the lake. It quickly vanished out of sight. I'd say it was at least 1.5 meters tall and on 4 legs, although funnily enough the front legs appeared longer than the hind legs. A bipedal creature running on all 4s, beige or brown, and a really fast runner. It made no noise except the sound of running. All the ducks in the lake began freaking out and started flying and screaming, which feels like weird behavior if it was just a deer running past. Just after the creature ran past, a very heavy smell of iron permeated the air. Both of us could smell it. It smelled like blood. I've never experienced a smell like that before, and I work in a hospital and deal with blood often. Personally, I'm fascinated by these events and definitely believe in different possibilities, but my dad is a hardcore skeptic, realist and science-loving man. He grew up on a farm in the middle of Sweden's forest and is very familiar with Swedish wildlife. He says he's never seen anything with that shape before, or anything move that fast. We don't have many big mammals here at all really, and the closest possibility is a deer, but they usually never come that close to people, and I've never seen one move that fast. And all their legs are roughly the same size, of course, not like this thing that seemed to have a significantly larger upper body. Me and my dad went back to the exact site the day after and checked for tracks. We were sort of expecting a trail of blood, since that would be a logical explanation for the smell, but there was none whatsoever. And the layer of snow on the ground was the same as the night before, so I thought it would be easy to spot. The snow gave us the ability to see hoof tracks very clearly though. My dad is a hunter, so I trust his judgment on the matter, and we also did a lot of research on the tracks and asked other hunters in the family afterwards. The only big mammals we have in southern Sweden are deer, hog and elk. It was definitely not an elk. The thing we saw was smaller than an elk calf. The tracks weren't from a pig or hog, as they have 4 distinct toes. The shape was similar to that of a deer hoofprint, but much larger. This thing was twice the size for regular deer tracks. Once again, we continued our research. Going back and checking made us even more confused about the event. The lack of blood makes the smell even more mysterious, and the tracks that don't fit any animal just add to the disturbing nature and question what the hell we saw that night. It was the beginning of December at night. I was washing my hands in the kitchen sink at Grandma's, and as I was washing them, I saw a green hat bobbing up and down in front of the window that was centered above the sink. I screamed to Grandma that there was an elf out there, and she refused to let me go out to chase it, and I'll never forget the sheer look of terror in her eyes. When my dad came to pick me up much later that night, I ran around the house and there were footprints all around the window in the snow. My family have never been one to go the extra mile to add a bit more magic to the holiday season, so I'm convinced it was none of them. Could it have been an elf? I was out hunting at our normal spot. Mind you, this was almost 13 years ago. I'm sitting in my spot. See the deer. Nothing worth shooting. I'm enjoying watching the animals. It's getting to the magic hour about twilight.
About 85 yards away is this tree line that bumps against the other property. I've been hunting in these woods for the better part of almost 5 years. That's when I noticed something big and black, moving against the tree line. Its moving was somewhat cumbersome. My first thought was that it was another hunter. I get kind of upset that he decides to mess around at this late in the game, when all of a sudden he takes off sprinting. This creature takes 4 to 5 leaps and has crossed the tree line. Mind you, it's nearly 200 yards long. This creature maybe took 6 to 7 leaps and cleared it in a few seconds. My buddy and I had walkie-talkies to keep each other informed about our location, or if we saw deer moving to each other's location. I immediately tell him something human is moving along the tree line at insane speed. After I talk to him, he confirms it, and we note the hell out of there. We never saw whatever it was again. This happened about 7 years ago. I was coming home from work into my dad's neighborhood. I was staying with him temporarily due to finances or lack thereof, when I saw something that I simply can't explain. I wasn't too far from the house when I see something from the corner of my eye. I turn my head, and I see this thing walking behind one of the larger houses. It was skinny, covered in grey fur, hugely intimidating. I only glimpsed it for a moment, but it stuck with me. The only way I can properly describe it was that it appeared to be a werewolf. Don't laugh, I fully realize how crazy it sounds, but I've never known wolves to be 6 feet tall, walk on their hind legs, and that is exactly what this creature was doing. I'm glad I didn't see it after, as I was thoroughly creeped out. I got married too young at 21 and divorced when I was 23. A few months went by and I started having these nightmares. Long story short, a girl in a white dress with brown matted hair with leaves and dirt walks into my house, tracking muddy footprints. She stops and stares at the attic stairs, which are now down for some reason. I ask her why she's there. She screams and the whole house crumbles. I never saw her face. I had this nightmare almost every night for 3 months. And when I say every night, I mean probably 95% of the time. For some reason, I started sleeping in my living room as opposed to my bedroom. I just wasn't very comfortable there. So I'm sleeping on the couch one night and wake up at 2 a.m. I check my phone and see I have a text from a friend and respond. Important because it verifies I was awake. I start getting very uncomfortable, and then I heard a knock at my door. I walk around and peek out the window and there's a girl there. I can't see anything other than her white hoodie, which is up, and long dark hair coming out of it. She knocks, then knocks again. Not urgently or anything, but she didn't appear intent on leaving. So stupidly in retrospect, looking back on it as a 34-year-old, I crack the door open. In a quiet voice, she asks if she can use my cell. I still can't really see her face because my porch light was out, and I'd been putting off changing the bulb for no reason at all. I ask if everything's okay, and she just repeats that she needs to use the phone. Again, against my better judgment, I put my cell phone to the dial screen and hand it to her. I see her hit a few things, and then puts her phone to the ear. As the screen lights up to give me a better view of her face, she was younger, like 18 to 22, plain, not really particularly distinguishable in any way. She waits for a minute and then says, "Hey, I need help. I need your help. Yeah, okay," and hands me the phone again. So I look at my phone and it's still on the dial screen. Something felt weird to me. So I click over to recent calls and she hadn't called anyone. When I looked up, she was gone. Not quite vanished, but way, way down the street, further than anyone should have been able to cover in that tiny time frame. At that moment, the nightmares stopped. Potentially related, 2 months later, I got a call from a friend late at night, maybe around 10 p.m.
They invited me over for a beer. I wasn't doing anything, so I did. I got back around 1 a.m. and my house had been broken into, like totally trashed, with a bunch of valuables gone. Certainly didn't think anything to do with it, but I sometimes wonder if that girl was casing my house that night. It's the only correlation I can make between the dream stopping and the real-world explanations for that weird experience. The whole thing was just super sketchy. In my 20s, I was up north in Quebec, Canada bush, way deep into it, in order to go fishing. To give you some context, the lake is in northern Quebec, about 9 hours from Ottawa, which involved 3 hours of highway driving until you turn into the bush for 6 hours of off-roading. So as you can imagine, it's deep into the bush, and you can't bring a boat. A few 10-foot aluminium boats were dropped on the shore from helicopters years ago, and we use those. So if something bad happens, basically, you're screwed. The boat was near the shore drifting along the water as I jigged. It's the dead of summer, with no wind. It's hot but quiet as hell. My friend snoozed at the front of the boat as we fished for hours. I looked up by the water, and about 25 feet there was this weird as hell animal that I will never forget. It was like a hairless, ugly, wrinkled alien marsupial. It likely thought I was alone for miles, because the sound it made was 100% natural. The thing I saw looked like a cross between Salacious Crumb, which is Jabba the Hutt's ugly little pet, and the Elephant Man. That's the only way I can describe it. It was the size of a 6 to 7-year-old child and perched on a dead tree stump when I first saw it. It was doing something with its hands, possibly cleaning itself. It was very creepy in the way it moved. Sort of animal, but humanoid too. I was mesmerized for a few minutes as the boat drifted towards the shore. I couldn't move. The thing had zero sense that someone else was around until the boat finally ran aground softly, and that is when it took off. It took off, stopped, looked back, and took off again. I felt its intelligence was more than that of an animal. This happened, and I will never forget.
First of all, let me introduce myself. I am a 20-year-old guy from Germany, but at the time of this event, I was 17. My father and I are both fishermen, and I have pretty much fished my entire life. My father lives in a pretty small town, so every time I was there, we would always be out in nature, either fishing or doing something else. There was a private property about 6 miles away from my father's house, and since it had lakes on it, my father one day went and bought it. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it was. Of course, for 9-year-old me, it was paradise to have lakes that nobody else fished in. Fast forward a few years, and we'd made this property our second home. We set up targets for us so that we can shoot them with bows, and both my father and I had become pretty good shots, and had compound bows. We also had built little huts out of logs and other materials that we found on the property, and if this wasn't paradise for me before, it surely was now. Over the years, we had a few problems with trespassers, most of them people who were just there to collect mushrooms or berries, but never had any problems with that. There were also a few people with somewhat sinister intentions. We were out on the property for my 2-week vacation. This was the morning of the 3rd day. I slept in my hut. I got up about 9 in the morning, and the first thing I did was check my phone. There was a message from my dad saying he would drop off our trailer later, because it was supposed to rain the following night. So I answered him that I would be waiting, and also asked him if he could drop off some extra food, because I was running low on supplies, and he happily agreed. After that, I began making myself my morning coffee and smoked my morning cig. When I finished it, I started fishing. I pretty much fished the whole day up until noon.
I remember looking over the little hill on which the road goes through the property all the way to the front gate, and I saw my father's truck making his way down to me with the trailer behind it. So I put my rod down and went to help my father. We unhooked the trailer and pushed it into position. After that, my father just exchanged words real quick on how everything was going, and I told him it was all fine. He gave me the food and water that he had brought for me, and after that he left. This might sound like a toxic relationship, but it's the complete opposite. My father and I both knew he just needed to get home to work for the following day, and we also knew that we could talk on the weekend when he was coming there to stay overnight, so it was fairly normal for us. He left, and I was once again alone. I decided that I was going to make myself some dinner. After that, I fished for a while longer, and decided to do a little check to make sure no one was on the property that wasn't supposed to. I didn't find anyone, but it was around that time that it started, the feeling of being watched. I had had that feeling for a whole walk, and it never left me. I was growing a little paranoid, thinking that there was something out there watching me. Maybe it was just a deer that I somehow failed to notice, even though I looked at the trees for what felt like eternity. So I kept on fishing even though I didn't feel comfortable, and just continued trying to brush it off. As it got darker, it was time for me to hit the hay. I moved my stuff from the hut to the trailer and stored it all in there. Because the feeling of being watched persisted, I decided to put my bow and my knife next to my bed, because I thought I'd rather be safe than sorry. I fell asleep and woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning to the sound of something hitting my trailer. I just lay there, listening. It sounded like little rocks hitting the roof. The feeling of being watched intensified now, along with a new feeling, dread, like something bad was imminent. So I had to make a decision. I could stay put or investigate. So I turned on my headlamp and lantern, which I placed just outside my trailer's front door, grabbed my knife, put it back into the holster on my bed, grabbed my bow and my quiver and went outside. I looked around, but couldn't see anything past the tree line. The sound of something hitting the trailer had also stopped. Now I was pissed, because I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but I wanted to make sure that no one was really there. So I decided to make another trip around the property, just to make sure. Bow in hand, I made my way round and found no one. Even more mad, because I made my way back to my trailer, and as soon as I saw the front of it, I froze. There was something there. I instantly killed my headlamp so whatever it was wouldn't see me, and I stood there watching. Because of the lantern I left next to the door, I could see the thing pretty well, but it couldn't see me. Or at least it didn't react. It was just standing there, banging onto the side of my trailer. This thing was standing on 2 legs. It was bipedal, and that rules out nearly every other animal we have here. Its body was strangely similar to that of a human, but its skin was way too pale to be that of a human, and his arms were way too long. It stood hunched over, about 7 feet tall, just standing there, looking at it for about 15 minutes. Once I kind of snapped out of the trance, the feeling of dread was replaced with fear. I'd never seen anything quite like it and stayed quiet. I knew I could move unseen right into his 6 o'clock position, so I made my way silently through the underbrush. Once I was behind it, I was only 40 yards away. I took aim with my bow, and even though the fear was pumping through my body, I was still able to hold the bow perfectly, took aim, and fired. The still of the night was replaced with an ungodly shriek that I can only describe as nothing I've ever heard before. I saw that I hit it, but it didn't go down. At that moment it turned to face me. I loaded up another arrow and fired again, and it just started to leap towards me. This thing was fast. I don't think it connected, but I didn't care.
I turned and I ran, sprinting through the underbrush, cutting myself everywhere. I stopped once I was out, near a paved road on the edge of the property. I stopped to listen, and noticed there was nothing behind me anymore. I dropped to my knees and began shaking, and was completely terrified. I waited there until the sun came up, and made my way back to the trailer. Once I reached it, I looked for signs that I had just imagined it, because I was in disbelief. But I could see the tracks of where this thing started running after me. Not like distinct footprints, but more like a path of destroyed bush and broken branches. Also, to this day, I haven't found the arrows that I fired that night. So I sat down, bow in hand, until my father arrived to check on me like he did almost every day. When he saw all the cuts on my arms and legs, he asked what happened, but I brushed it off and told him nonchalantly I stumbled into a thorn bush. I've never told him this story. In fact, this is the first time I speak about it. We still go to the property every now and again, but now I always carry a big hunting knife and have my bow with me. I had nightmares about what could have happened for 2 years after that, and to this day I don't know what I saw. I'm pretty sure it wasn't my imagination. This encounter happened last night while I was hiking with my husband and son. We went hiking to this spot in Southern California, where we've been going for the last 13 years. The hiking trails are basically located all along the cliff. Some trails lead to a secluded beach, others to a cave. We took the trail that leads to the beach, and we usually kept walking longer than the average person, since we are more familiar with the terrain after the trail ends. Around 4:30, we decided to hike back up the trail while watching the sunset. At the same time, the moon was rising in the opposite direction. This moon was huge, probably one of the biggest moons I've ever seen, and we decided once we got back to the top of the trail around 5:30 p.m. to keep hiking along some other trail, which we've only been to once. The night was still young and plenty of families were walking among them, and I decided to take a quick break after a short jog to enjoy the scenery and appreciate the moon. At this time, my husband and son were pretty far from me, and all I could see was their silhouette. The night was now upon us, and the fog from the Pacific Ocean was making its way up the cliff into the hiking trails. My husband and son decided to turn back and meet me because it was getting dark. My son began to run past us. At this point, my husband looks towards his direction and sees this black silhouette of a tall person standing around 9 meters from my son. As soon as this thing notices that my husband is looking at it, it gets on all fours and takes off like an animal. He yells for my son to come back. He then tells me what he saw and says something is running across the trail. I'm scared of dogs, so the first thing I thought was that it must have been a stray dog running loose. But he said no, it's bigger than a dog, almost the size of a bear, but it had the silhouette of a man standing in the middle of the trail, and it took off running on all fours as soon as I saw it. He said this thing was darker than the darkness around us. At this point, we were freaking the hell out. We were hugging each other close, not knowing what to expect next. We were basically in the middle of a trail we've only been in once with terrible phone service. We looked around the trail, and it was completely empty. We were basically the only ones there. The trail went from being packed with people to now us three being the only ones there within minutes, which made everything ever more terrifying. We decided to suck it up and walk back to our car, which meant we had to pass by where my husband saw the thing. My husband said he thought he saw this thing run down the trail, but once we got to the spot where he saw it, the trail turns right, but the figure ran left. To the left was a fence and a bunch of tall bushes, making it impossible for something to go that way. Whatever it was must have jumped the fence to keep going. We never saw or heard it jump, and better yet, we didn't even hear footsteps or anything move in the bushes. My husband said it just disappeared. We managed to keep walking along the trail while holding his phone flashlight,
pointed at the fence and bushes where he saw it go towards, and all I had was my water bottle, and I was ready to use it as a weapon. All we could hope for at this time was to see other people coming down the trail. Then we finally see lights coming from a motorbike towards the end of it. This person was going into the trail as we were relieved to be out of it and into the parking lot. When we finally got there, it went from 50 cars to only 2 cars left. There was a couple outside taking pictures. At this point, even the person in the motorbike noped out of the trail to the parking lot and left. We made our way back out to our car, and I joked with my husband how we may have seen a werewolf. He was still in shock and didn't say no, but was still trying to process what he saw. My son said he saw something crawling, and that's when my husband called him to come back towards us. He was really scared that night and refused to sleep by himself. We all slept in the same room. My son said he felt like it was following us the whole time. I hope not. Today we ended up watching this segment on the news by accident while having dinner, and we heard that today is a super blood wolf moon. Now I'm 90% convinced he saw a werewolf, 5% it was a shapeshifter, and 5% a shadow person. This location is notorious for many deaths as it's on a cliff where many have died from falling over. When we first went there, for the first time, there was a sign around the same place he saw this thing about a person who lost its life falling from the cliff. Others have drowned at that location too.
I'm normally pretty logical about seeing weird stuff. I work nights and go long periods of time without sleeping, so my mind playing tricks on me isn't that unusual. But this happened in broad daylight with other people around, and it has left me completely confused. I was repairing a condenser in a very standard-looking suburban neighborhood. Directly across the street was a mother playing in her driveway with her toddler, pushing him around in one of those plastic cars. I was walking back to my work van around the side of the house when I hear a shriek, like a noise that you would hear and know something is being heard. I took a quick few steps to clear the corner of the house and see what was happening. Mother across the street didn't seem to hear or care. Then I heard it again, but being from the side of the house, I could pinpoint a little better. My head snapped to the house directly to the right of the one the mother was in front of, and I saw a small child staring directly at me with its mouth open and eyes. They seemed to be completely black all the way around the eye socket. I looked at the mother. Sure, she had to at least notice or hear the commotion, but she didn't. The thing waved, not like in a come here motion, but more so an acknowledging its awareness of me. I walked slowly back to the condenser and hid for maybe 5 minutes. When I came back around, it was gone, and the mother had carried on like nothing had happened. I had no explanation for what happened and still don't. I went home and began to tell my girlfriend what had happened, and she told me about the black-eyed children. I don't know what I saw that day, but there was something so deeply unsettling about the entire situation. My cousin and I used to play outside in the middle of the night. This happened when we were around 14. Since I lived close to a 24/7 PD, we'd grab our Nerf guns and pretend to have a mission of some sort. And on this particular day, our mission was to find 3 Coke cans around the neighborhood while shooting every car we saw. We ended up on a little parking lot between 2 houses. There we found the last Coke can on the trash, and the mission was over. While heading back home, in one of the gaps between the houses, sort of like an alley, we heard movement. So we both looked at it and pointed our Nerf gun flashlights, and I swear on everything I know, right there, in the corner crouched and humped, was a pale, skinny, naked creature. It had no fur or any visual cues that would indicate what it was. After the 2 of us shining the flashlight at it, the thing turned to us very fast and started getting up slowly. At this point I was frozen in fear. It had at least 2 meters in height. It either had black and big eyes or no eyes at all. I turned to my cousin and said, "Corre, mano," which means run, bro, in Portuguese. But he was already 20 meters away from me, where the street turned the corner, so I ran too, and we didn't speak about it until I got home. I still have no idea what the hell that was, and is honestly to this day the scariest experience of my life.
I live in a small town called Bundaberg in southeast Queensland, Australia. It's a small farming town on the coast, and the property we're on is surrounded by cane paddocks most of the year, unless they've been harvested, of course, which they are right now. I haven't always lived here. I lived with my mum for all of my life with my other brothers and 2 sisters, but my older brother lived with our grandparents and has been here on the property for about 15 years or so. Of course, I came and went visiting over the years, but I never witnessed this myself. Grandpa is the custodian and prince of the first people of the area, the Reuploading, and this property we're on is sacred and belongs to us through a native title, which Grandpa won many years ago. Grandpa was actually born on the Burnett River that runs through the property down the back. Anyway, as you know, you have the Sasquatch of the Americas, and I assume people have heard of the Yowie, or the Australian version of Bigfoot, also known as Quinkin. But these are the big guys, the giants, colloquially known as hairy men. There are also a different type, which we call Junjurdi, which are the little ones growing no bigger than 5 feet high. There's a story that my older brother used to tell me about how there was a whole group that used to hang out right where I'm sleeping, which is a shed that's been done up about 30 or so meters from the house. But right here used to be a big, bushy, wild orange tree before there were any sheds, and this was a clean-cut yard, completely wide open. You can see me clearly walking up from the shed through the sliding glass door when sitting in the lounge room. When the orange tree was there, apparently they used to hang out some nights, and usually always in the early hours of the morning, even sleep under it, and my brother Renan and Grandpa said you could clearly see them, either from the lounge room or a bedroom window, but all the bedroom windows were on that one side of the house, and apparently they just completely ignored them until they started messing around with my brother and cousins late at night. Sometimes they would tap and peek through the windows and that. One night my brother is sleeping in his bedroom, and one of our cousins is in there. They were only 13 at the time. They slept with the window open for a breeze. Apparently, our cousins wake up and sees this thing moving around in the room and looks at them, and he just screams and cowers in the corner. My brother wakes up and freaks, screaming for Nan and Grandpa, running straight out the room and down the hallway, and this thing leaps out the window, knocking stuff off the drawers, and runs off into the paddock. The next day, Grandpa went and chopped the orange tree down. Yes, he gave him a chance. But once they'd done that, it was time they made themselves scarce. Just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived in southeast Australia is the opening to about 100 acres of woodland and bush that I frequently went in when I was younger to do the usual thing, riding, camping and stuff. I was out driving at about 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend. As we were in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loved everything to do with nature, and it was summer and a very warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us kind of just sat chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a map of the area that had been put in on some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees, and I had the distinct feeling that something was wrong. Now I've heard and read that people say that they just get this feeling when they're in danger, even though they can't see anything around them, that it just felt off. I was experiencing this very feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realized that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the darkness that I saw that there was moonlight now, lighting up grass where there wasn't before, and there was a black shape blocking it. At first, I thought it was a tree. I got goosebumps just remembering this. All sound just ceased, and everything went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread washed over me. I saw motion in the dark of the path, and this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it. It was night, and I couldn't look away. But just as it reached the line of my car lights, and it was about to be illuminated, it reared up on two legs and was staring at us. I am 6'4", and this thing had about another meter on me, with arms that were far too long and reached near the ground. All I could make out was an off-whitish, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light, I could make out the silhouette of its head. It looked like a dog or wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me. But it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break whatever was stopping me from logically thinking, as I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed on the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could, both of us too scared to speak, until about a half hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine rabbits see when it catches a wolf or fox looking at it. That is something that will be able to end us with absolute ease if it so chooses. Neither of us have been able to come up with an explanation for what it was, but it has definitely changed the way I view the woods and bush when I go camping or hiking now. I think back to that and wonder what it was and if I will ever see anything like it again.
It was just my average night of passing out in front of the TV. It was blaringly hot in the summer, and I needed my AC on pretty much all night, otherwise I would roast alive in my bed. This particular night, I had the AC turned on, and at around 1 AM when I woke up from my slumber in front of the TV, I groggingly turned my TV off, turned off the AC and the lights, and dragged myself up the stairs to my bed. I didn't brush the teeth, but instead threw my tattered body onto the bed and passed out immediately. The aircon was blowing right in my face, and I was enjoying the cool sensation overtake me. Just as I had drifted off into sleep, the aircon suddenly turned off. I look up. The little light with the temperature number has suddenly come off. I don't know if anyone uses it other than me, but I like to keep mine on to have a very dim light and perception of what's around me at night. But for some reason the unit had turned off. I was very tired, but I was more hot than tired, so I rolled around until I found the remote, and after smashing the buttons and getting no reply, I looked over at my phone, which was connected to the charger next to my bed. It was off too. Maybe the power went out. Now, there have been a few instances where, for whatever reason, my house has the power go out. All that I have to do is flip the switch and it comes back on. But of course, it could also be a general problem. I look out my window and see my neighbor's light is off, but it could just be they're asleep. So I walk down the stairs, exhausted and hot, and try and find the switch. When I flip it, to my dismay, no electricity comes back on. There is actually an additional safety switch outside that can sometimes be triggered, so I make my way out and have a little poke around to see if it does anything. It doesn't. Just as I'm about to turn around and head back to my house, at the gate of my property, I see two people walking by. I assume they're my neighbors, but have never seen them before, and call out to them, "Hey, did your power go out too?" The neighbors slowly turn to me. It was a boy of about 20, I'd say, and a younger child with him, of around 14. They look over to me with only the moon illuminating the area. And as I asked them again, because I felt like they hadn't heard me properly if the power had gone out, they just stare blankly at me. There was something off about their stare. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Hey guys, did your power go out too?" They stand there in sort of stunned silence, not saying a word. At this moment, awkwardness and general fear crept over me, and I stare at them in silence for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. "Alright then lads, well thank you. I'm gonna go back to bed." I slowly start making my way to my door, and just as I'm about to open it do I hear them say, "Hold on." There was something about the tone, something about the way he said that, "Hold on." I can't quite put my finger on it, but it gave me goosebumps and I got a tingle all the way up my spine. I slowly turn around and they're now staring at me from the other side of the street. "Yes? Can you help us? We're lost and need to use your phone." "Oh, sorry guys. My phone actually is dead. I don't have a charger working right now because of the lack of power, but hopefully you can find some way to contact whoever it is you need to," I say. My words came out almost forcefully, as even talking to these people seemed to really put me on edge. As I said that, I noticed that my hands were lightly shaking, so I wished them good night, go in and close my door, and lock it with the deadbolt, which is something I don't often do ever, even though my dad insisted I put it in. I slowly make my way up the stairs. Halfway up, there is a small window that lets you see out in front of the house, and as I do just that, I peek my eyes out and stare directly at these guys. The thing is though, they're staring right back at me, almost like they can see me, in the darkness and the limited illumination provided by the moonlight. They stare straight at me, and while focusing and paying more attention, I notice there's something off. It would appear that their eyes were completely black. I was tired, told myself I was exhausted, and chalked it up to there being not enough light. Crawled up to my bed and had the worst night's sleep I had for ages. The electricity didn't actually come back until midday the next day. That was bad. I never really thought much about my experience until reading online and finding out other people had seen these guys as well. They call them the black-eyed kids. Well, the older one wasn't a kid, but the young one, perhaps, 14 or so. Even so, they didn't ask to be let in, but it still leaves me with a deeply unsettling feeling. What did I witness that night? All that I know is that I don't want to see them again, if it's all the same. This happened to me when I was 11 to 12 years old. I was walking with my friend in the woods in Texas, when suddenly I see a pitch-white humanoid creature running on all fours at least 4 feet away from us. We were stunned, to say the least, and as we paid attention to its features, we grew ever more disturbed. Its jaw looked unhinged, with small, black, beady eyes, and its neck was extremely saggy like that of a rooster. It was scrawny and malnourished looking, and had long, black claws that were at least 3 to 4 inches long. I didn't stay too long for a good look, since the moment after we saw it, we ran out of the woods in a full sprint, panicking. We made it home safely, and both of us saw it clearly, and neither of us have the slightest idea whatever the hell it is. If anyone has any information regarding this creature, I would love to know, as it has left me perplexed for the longest time.
I was about 15 or 16 years old. I'm walking home from a friend's place at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with the friend I was living with at the time. My mate was pushing a BMX, and we were just talking and laughing as we walked home, when all of a sudden we saw what looked like 2 very large greyhounds jump over a set of mailboxes at some flats and landed in the middle of the road. These mailboxes appeared to have been 1.5 meters tall and about 5 to 6 meters from the road. At the moment I thought it was a little strange, but kept watching them. What I witnessed was something I will never forget in my life. The 2 greyhounds, as they ran down the road, appeared to both stand up on their hind legs and morph into a much bigger and much beefier being, which I can only describe as looking like a yowie, which I guess is the equivalent to a Sasquatch to our friends from America and other countries. These yowie both ran around the corner about 200 meters in the direction we came, and we both sat there dumbfounded. A few seconds later, we heard what sounded like a small female child scream in terror, keeping in mind it was around 3 a.m. in the morning, and there were no children out. We both looked at each other in horror, without saying a word, and I jumped on the handlebars on the bike and he pedaled that bike non-stop all the way home about 2 kilometers away. When we got home, we locked the doors, as we had no idea what we just saw, or if they had seen where we went, and after a little while I asked him to describe what he had seen, and I was in disbelief, as he explained the exact same thing I witnessed. That is probably the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've only told a few people about it, and don't think a single person has believed me. They all blame drugs or alcohol. I have been hesitant on posting this story due to the fact I don't want anyone ever thinking that I, or the person the story is about, is crazy. But I must say this actually happened. I'm an intern for a church that does work on a Navajo reservation site, helping the community of people roof their homes, repaint, do interior fixing and stuff like that, with good pay and nice people. So overall, I'm happy with this. And just as a disclaimer, I'm still in my 20s, and I'm not trying to offend any Navajo reservation traditions in any way. This is just a first-hand story on what is currently happening on my trip. You see, on the past 2 months of the internship, I've begun to grow fairly close with some of the residents on the reservation. One lady in particular that I got to know pretty well was the superstitious type, and say things like to never be outside at night, or other randomly seeming things to me. But the biggest taboo I knew to never mention, mainly because I was told by my superiors, was Navajo folklore, like skinwalkers. However, one day it was very different in the sense that the question was just burning within me. I was on my lunch break after wrapping up painting part of her house, and she sits next to me on the porch and we talk for a while, until I finally feel comfortable enough to ask her about any folklore or anything of the sort that she can tell me, like werewolves and stuff. I didn't really expect a response. I thought maybe she'd quickly say no, then change the topic, but if anything, I was more scared I may offend her. But to my surprise, she turns her head, looking towards the outside scenery, hesitates and then says, "Yes, I know some, and I've experienced some too." She proceeds to tell me a description of the apparent equivalent to a werewolf. To paraphrase what she said, werewolves look like normal people, but masked in white paint covering their face, arms, and chest. Their whole body as white as a corpse, covered with black symbols, quite possibly related to devil worshipping. More specifically, they're gravediggers and necromancers, digging up bodies and stealing jewelry, although they may perform other acts to corpses. She quickly strayed away from going too much into detail. Werewolves also, allegedly, draw their power from the devil. That is how they're able to possess such supernatural strength and endurance. I was surprised to hear this, although I didn't think that werewolves would look anything like how they did in Twilight or Scooby-Doo. Deep down, I thought she sounded a bit crazy, and before I could ask any more questions, she began to tell me her own interaction with these supernatural beasts. She explained that one day her and her husband were driving on the curvy roads alongside the mountains, only to find a woman with her face covered by her hands, kneeling in the middle of the road, that appeared to be crying. The woman looks up towards the car's headlights to reveal the very same white paint and sacrificial symbols mentioned previously. Her husband honked the horn and quickly slams on the brakes, only to be too late, and hears the loud cracking sound as the woman's bones and flesh splashes all over the windshield. Once her and her husband stop the car safely and proceed to analyze what the hell happened, they quickly run over to the spot where they hit the woman. However, once they reach the spot, there was no body, but not only that, there was no trace of blood either. Just as a side note, this part of the reservation had some cliffs, but it was relatively flat, so it would be obvious to tell where someone is, especially if they just got hit by a car. Puzzled by what the possible explanation could be for this occurrence, her and her husband drove back, trying to neglect the thought that they just saw a werewolf. However, being the non-paranormal believers they were at the time, they tried to close this occurrence off as them just losing their minds temporarily. As interesting as her story was, this got me thinking, is it possible for werewolf stories to be true? Or is this her own way of describing a skinwalker or other supernatural phenomenon? Because she didn't think I knew what a skinwalker was? This question began circulating my mind. So as you would expect after hearing such a story, that night it was very hard for me to sleep comfortably. Because of that, during the work days, I'd feel more and more mentally drained and almost paranoid. At the end of the week, at around 6, I was sitting in the car driving back to the church site and was in the mental state of mind where I was half awake and half asleep. My buddy was driving and claimed that he wanted to pull over to the gas station that was near the church to grab a few snacks to munch on during our brief time in our cabin. Since I was too tired to argue, I said fine, and laid my face against the window and tried to doze off while waiting for my friend. However, I had the weirdest feeling that I was being watched, so naturally I opened my eyes and looked out the window. I saw nothing. However, when I turned my head out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a white figure, just as the woman described previously. I looked back, and nothing was there. But I swear I saw something, since it was the beginning to get darker outside. I quickly sat up in my seat to readjust my vision, but when I looked back out the window, it was almost as though the figure vanished. Perplexed, I stepped outside the car and looked around, but there was no trace of a creature ever existing. My buddy comes back to the car and questions what the heck I was doing, debating whether or not I should tell him. I decide to say that I was just getting some fresh air. The following days got worse though. My mood is getting worse. I'm feeling a lot more paranoid that something's out there, and at night I can almost swear that I hear screams in the distance. Everything outside just looks 100 times scarier too, because there's barely any light outside besides the moonlight, so everything has more of an exaggerated appearance. But believe me, I know I sound crazy. But the worst part is that if I tell anyone, they'll think I'm crazy too. So I've been debating whether or not I actually saw the werewolf the lady described, or if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me.
I used to work at an all-night gas station. We were conveniently situated about 10 miles between two quite large towns and saw a heavy amount of traffic even at night. That night, I was just sitting behind the counter on my phone, waiting for something interesting to happen or a customer. I actually hadn't had anyone come for about the last half an hour, which at 3 a.m. is to be expected. Just as I'm blitzing through this Candy Crush level, does something pique my interest on the monitor above my head. We have security cameras pointed at almost every conceivable angle around the gas station, because we've had incidences in the past where people have come with firearms to steal the money from the cash register and items of convenience from the store itself. So, as I look up, I see what appears to be someone lumbering towards the gas station from the main road. It was quite dark, so I couldn't make them out clearly, but assumed that whoever they were walking towards us for a snack or whatever. I didn't pay it much mind. I knew they were going to eventually come into this store, so I kept doing my level and waited until that happened. About 5 minutes passed and no one had arrived. Weird, I thought, so I look up at the monitor again. I see them. It appears that they're standing right outside the convenience store, staring in through the window. Instinctually, I look up to the window where they allegedly are, but see nothing. For a moment, I do a triple take, looking up at the screen, down at the window, up at the screen, down at the window, and again. My mind can't make sense of something. I'm clearly looking at a guy wearing a hoodie, standing there, looking in on the store, but when I look in the exact spot where he should be, there's no one there. At this point, I stand up and stand on my chair. With the sleeve of my uniform, I try and wipe the screen, assuming it must be a smudge. But there's nothing. The closer I look, the more I can see the pixels lightly move from left to right. It's definitely a person. I just about crap a brick. There's me, staring into the screen, looking at something that I can't see with my own naked eye. I look over at the exact spot where they should be, right next to the grit as it happens, which I can see from this window, and see absolutely nothing. My heart is now pounding out of my chest. What the hell is going on here? Is this a joke set up by one of my co-workers? Had someone hacked into the cameras and overlaid this dude? I thought I was going to lose my mind. So I call my mum. Even though it's early in the morning, she knows that I can call her. In fact, she told me to call her if ever anything presents itself, so she knows her daughter's safe. I call her and she answers the phone. I didn't want to tell her. I didn't want to sound crazy or that I'd lost myself, because I knew that if she thought something was up, she'd pull me out of this job quick. Hey Mum, you okay? Yeah, just tired. You okay, honey? Yeah, just wanted to see that you guys are okay. Is Dad okay? Yeah. You okay, honey? Yeah, Mum, yeah, I'm all good. Alright, good night. My mum clearly was extremely tired, and I knew that I didn't have the heart to tell her something was wrong, because, well, nothing was wrong. There was just something wrong with this screen, or myself. I sat back down and tried to play Candy Crush, but this thought was at the forefront of my mind, screaming for my attention. So I put my phone down and look up again. It's not there anymore. A sigh of relief washes over me as my eyes look over towards the other monitors, and that's when I just about crap another brick. Whatever it is, is now walking around the perimeter of the building. I see it by the dumpsters, and then lumber, slowly, moving around until it's by the fire exit. Now the fire exit has a small window that you can see through. I am bricking it. I know that if I tilt my head just at the right angle and look forward, I will be able to see the fire exit, which is situated just to the right of me. I take a deep breath, another deep breath, and slowly twist my head to the right and look at the fire exit. It's at that moment that I see whatever it is. It's a person wearing dark clothes, just standing there staring at me, head concealed by a hood. I swear, I could have had a heart attack. With the fear, the darkness of the outside, and just staring in the dim light at this thing that was previously not visible at all. I pull my head back quickly and just stare at my phone, screen off, just waiting for something to happen. A few minutes later, paralyzed with fear, I see a car pull up at the gas station. They don't go for gas, but instead come in to grab a snack. It's a dude. He appears to be in his mid-40s. He grabs a few things and smacks them down in a rush on the counter. He looks down at me though, and in a moment, sort of seems placated and asks if everything's alright. The rush on his face seems to die away when he sees absolute terror in my eyes. Yeah, sorry, nothing's wrong, I'm fine. He gives me a quizzical look, but doesn't push any further, pays for the items and leaves. Just as he's pulling away, somehow, with the comfort of knowing there's someone at least nearby, I tilt my head again and look out the door. There's no one there. The camera reflects this. The person is gone. I wait, and they don't return. Thinking I'd seen the last of them, I happily just try and concentrate on doing some stock taking before my replacement comes in at 5 a.m. When Brenda arrives at 5 a.m., she and I have a small chat. She can tell that I'm visibly shaken and that something is wrong. Her first instinct is to ask if I'd been robbed or if someone had come in with a gun or something. I tell her no, nothing like that. And I don't really know how to describe it, but in the way she looked at me, it was as if she can tell something I couldn't quite explain had occurred. Then she gets a bright idea. Did you see the hoodie man? The hoodie man? I ask. Yeah, the hoodie man. Listen, John told me a story about how a few years back, he was here in the dead of night when a guy in a dark hoodie showed up. He just started tapping on the window. John told him to go away, but when he wouldn't, he went out to confront him personally. As he went to open the door, the man went for the door too, and as he looked through the glass door about to open it, did he see that this man had no pupil whatsoever and just two dark eyes. He assumed the guy was tweaked out on something, who knows how many drugs to get that effect, or maybe contact lenses. But as you guessed, John locked up quick and didn't let anyone in for the next hour or so until the police came. When they came, they looked up and down the road but couldn't find anyone. And since then, a few people have said that they've seen him in the cameras, but he's never actually come in. I feel a sense of relief and horror at the same time, knowing I wasn't crazy, but knowing I wasn't crazy meant it must have been true. I wasn't entirely sure where I stood, and the fear enveloped me even harder. I tell her, yeah, I think I saw that, and said that I had to go, that my parents were waiting for me, and just drove home. I try not to think about what I saw, some phantom tweaker, or God knows what. I'm from a small village in northern Cambodia, with no clean water and we live in run-down houses. In order to get to the nearest town, where there's actually a big store and a supermarket and stuff like that, we have to walk miles to get there. I want to share with you a story that happened when I was around 5 or 6 years old. My mother left me and my brothers home alone to go out drinking. While she was out, we decided to play in the back garden. Nothing unusual there. About half an hour into our game, we see a figure looming in the distance. We were really young, so obviously we didn't think to run away or anything, until it approached and we saw what it actually was. Now in Cambodia, there are a number of urban legends, one of these being the App. She is basically a female spirit who manifests as a beautiful woman, but with her organs hanging out from her head and neck, and moves by hovering slowly above the ground. You guessed it. The thing that was approaching us was the App. It was terrifying. Her long black hair swaying gently in the wind, with blood and other fluids dripping from her organs, and her smile. Her smile was truly horrifying. I picked up my youngest brother as best I could, and we ran inside. I tried to block the door, but obviously did not do a very good job. None of us slept that night. We were way too scared. But we were also too afraid to call for help, and just hid in a corner praying for our mother to come home. Eventually she did, and we tried to tell her, but she wouldn't believe us. She thought we had just left our imaginations to get the better of us. I want to believe that it was fake somehow, and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but she was so real, unwitnessed by me and my brothers. It's the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and no one will believe me. I appreciate the entire story sounds like a really bad horror movie, but it wasn't. I really wish it was, though. It has been 13 years since this event took place, and I still get nightmares about it.
In December of 2011, my husband and I moved to my husband's childhood home in rural southeast Oklahoma. His father died in 2007, and the deed was transferred to my husband's name. The house is located about 175 yards from the community church and its small graveyard. This is a Native American community. It was small and very rural, surrounded by hills and thick woods with intermittent cow pastures, and community that consisted of a huge family network, an extended family, about 5 or 6 generations of them. There are 16 homes with an acre each lot. It's country after all. Before we moved into my husband's home, he told me about some weird paranormal activity he and his family experienced at the same home when he was younger. I've had 1 or 2 experiences prior to moving to Oklahoma, but nothing on this level. Once we moved in, little things would happen every now and then. My story is about a specific experience I had while I was sitting in our living room one evening. I was watching TV with my husband and our 10-month-old daughter in a walker. I had a view of the hallway that leads to our bedrooms and bathroom. My husband walked into the gallery for a drink with our little girl following behind him in her walker. At that very moment, they disappeared behind the kitchen wall. From the corner of my eye, I saw what I interpreted to be our 10-month-old go from one of the bedrooms into the hallway. All I saw was the back of the head of whatever it was. I was confused for a second, so I asked my husband if our daughter was with him, just to be sure our daughter was with him in the kitchen, because we always tried to keep her away from the hallway just to be safe. Yeah, why? I got so creeped out, because whatever I had seen was about her height but walking without a walker. All I caught was the back of a head of a short person entering the bathroom. I told my husband right away, and so he checked it out for me, but there wasn't anyone else in the house with us. After some more experiences, I started to smudge the house on a regular basis. We ended up splitting up for a while, and I moved back home in the summer of 2014. My husband had more intense, scary experiences while he was living there alone during our separation, but I'll save those stories for another time. I live in a very secluded, woodsy part of a small southern town. It's really peaceful during the day, but it gets a little scary at night. There are a few houses on my road, but for the most part it's only trees. There are a few reoccurring events that are all pretty spooky, but the main one is what my friends and I call the Dogman. For lack of a better name, I've only seen it twice in my life. I've lived in this part of town for 3 years. The Dogman has a body shaped like that of a scrawny human. Its bones are very visible. It has fur, but only in patches over its body, sort of like a dog with mange. Though it has the bodily proportions of a person, it has the head of a dog and can run extremely fast and is huge. To preface, my room is at the front of the house. Our front yard is the size of a field. I have the biggest windows in the house in my bedroom, and it faces the front yard. I do not have blinds over my windows, as my bed is in front of it. The first time I saw the Dogman, it was late at night, and I was sitting in bed. I saw it running through the yard. Shortly after, my cat, who was an indoor/outdoor cat at the time, came inside growling. The cat was found dead across the creek near my yard this July. He had no visible injuries and was very young and healthy. We still don't know how he died. The second time I saw it was earlier tonight. My friends and I were sitting on my porch when we noticed a very large moving mass on the base of the mountain, which we lived right in front of, and we decided to get a closer look. My friend stayed behind to watch as my grandfather and I drove down the road to the base of the mountain. I didn't want to drive there alone. As we approached it, we stopped in front of the mass. It was a tree. Something then sprinted out from behind it and into the woods to the right of us. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. It was a Dogman. If you have any ideas to what the hell this is or how I can go about finding out more, I'd love to hear about it. It is really freaking us out.
This story happened to my dad. He is the most no-nonsense person I know and works as a long-haul truck driver. This happened a few years back. He came back shaken from this one job he did, and when we asked about it, he didn't want to talk. It took him a few weeks before he actually revealed what it was that happened, for fear of sounding crazy. The following is his story, as how he told it to me. So, I was doing a normal job. I was getting quite tired and was getting up to my hours anyway. So I parked up and went in to the rest stop to have a sandwich and a bite to eat and use the restroom. I noticed that there were a bunch of lot lizards around this area too. Note, lot lizards are, shall we say, women of negotiable affection that generally hang around rest areas to try and lure truckers. So, there are a bunch of these ladies around the area. My dad, a very happily married man, had no interest in them whatsoever. He did his business, had some food, and went back to his truck so that he could take a nap. He had to have a few hours sleep until breakfast before he could even drive again. So he's trying to get to sleep, and scrolling through his phone right before he does just that, when he hears a knock on the window. This isn't the first time he's had to deal with lot lizards, so he just shouts to them to go away and that he's not interested. He'd already locked the door, he was sure of that. So, he turns off his phone and tries to get comfortable. but the tapping continues. "I said to go away," he shouts, this time with more force and aggression. And my dad is definitely the kind of person who, when aggression is required, it can come out in his voice and be very startling. But the tapping persists. This time he's getting angry. He goes over and looks down to see a small child. This took him back. He rolls down the window and asks if everything's all right, tone and mood changing completely. "Hello. Can you help me, please? I'm lost and want to find my mum." He recalls there being something almost robotic about the way the question was put. Not really human. He looks down at the child. They don't seem to be more than 9 or 10. Okay, sweetie. Where did you last see your mum? I think this is a job for the police." The child didn't seem fazed, but just replied, "I don't know, but I need to find them, please. Can I use your phone? Can you let me in?" Something was wrong with this situation. My dad could just tell. He was starting to get goosebumps and really didn't want to let this creepy little 10-year-old into his truck. How about I call the authorities, alright?" He goes to grab his phone, and when he comes right back, she's now standing on his rig, staring up at him, closer now, right by the open window. "Can you let me in, please?" My dad takes one look at her and jumps back. There are no pupils. Her eyes are completely black. He says he almost had a heart attack right there and then, and he's a big man, so I believe it when he says that could have happened. He just kind of stares at her in a panic. "Let me in, John. I need help." How the hell did she know his name? He wondered if perhaps it was written on a paper or something that was visible through the window. He just said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Ask the next truck." The child didn't persist, but was simply gone, almost like they'd vanished. He looked down to see if they were still there, but they were gone, almost like they had never been there at all. My dad closed his window and went back to try and get some rest, but he couldn't. He just stared up at the ceiling, eyes wide open, wondering what the hell happened, fear enveloping him. It was quite late. He desperately wanted to call my mum, just to have someone to talk to, but knew that she would be fast asleep. He stayed awake until around 6 a.m. when he finally called my mum, saying in his head that it was early enough for her to accept the call without getting pissed. He didn't tell her what happened, but just wanted someone to talk to. He didn't even want to step outside. Only in the daylight, when he saw other people walking around the place, did he finally get the courage to go outside. It really affected him. He will now never answer anyone tapping or knocking on the window, not verbally or at all, and just pretend like he's not there. It really shook him. I still wonder what the hell it was that he saw that night. My mum says it might have been an alien, but I don't know.
When I was 12 or so and visiting our holiday home, I saw a person/being in our neighbor's yard. He was a humanoid in most ways, but his skin was grey like concrete and super wrinkly. Not like a very old person, but rather he had few but large wrinkles like a wrinkly dog. Suddenly he looks up and stares at me. This is when I notice his unusual skin, and I freeze as well. We stare at each other for a few seconds before he scurries away and disappears behind the house. And it wasn't in the middle of the night, or a dark, secluded, creepy place. It was the middle of the day. It was sunny, and there were other people around, but no one else noticed him. Later that day, when the sun had just started to set, I saw him again. I had just stepped out the house, and he was standing in our neighbor's yard again, seemingly waiting for me. We were just looking at each other for a minute or so. He seemed to try and determine whether or not I was a threat. I was trying to do the same with him. Finally, he settled on not, and turned around and vanished behind their house again. That was 16 years ago, and I've never seen him since. Even though I've been there many times, I've never heard anyone else talk about seeing something similar either. We were playing manhunt, and we saw something swinging from the trees, like a dark brown black creature swinging. Never saw it again. Then years later, when I was in high school, I'm working at a sub shop. My co-workers and I were the only ones on, and we're talking about the time when he was walking through the woods with his friend and saw something swinging through the trees and described the same thing. These woods in question are connected too. I was in a different set of woods around the park, and it's old Native American grounds. A lot of my city is. But I was talking to 3 friends, and was the only one facing a certain direction, when all of a sudden, I see a fluorescent green person running, almost like a full reflector suit. But as it's got maybe a 20-yard radius, it disappears mid-stride. Something really creepy is happening at my house, and I've been debating whether I should share this or not. It's really starting to freak me out, and I'm asking for your help. I live in a pretty rural area in Michigan close to the lake, and I'm currently living alone. Both my parents are in Canada, taking care of my great-uncle who's in his late 80s, and they've been gone for a month or so, and probably won't be back until late December. I'm 19, and I'm old enough to be alone. But some really odd things have been happening in the last 2 weeks. It started back in September, when my 15-year-old cat Ginger Snap went missing. At first, I figured she had passed away since she was very old and had a few health problems already. Then a few days later, I found her body completely torn to shreds on my back porch. I mean, she was severely mutilated to the point where I threw up while sobbing hysterically. I came to the conclusion that it must have been a bird of prey, since we have some big owls and hawks where I live. A few days passed, and on the 4th of October, something odd happened. I was watching TV around 11 p.m. and kept hearing a really fast knocking sound. It would come in sets of 5s, and then stop for a while and start again. I ended up going outside to investigate, but couldn't see anyone. There was a really horrific smell. Then, what happened last night? I was awoken at about 3 a.m., which happens sometimes if I get a really messed up dream. I walked down the hall to grab a drink and thought perhaps I'd watch some TV to put me back to sleep. While I got to the fridge, which is right next to the back porch, I heard something walking around. I froze up and stayed completely still. I looked over to the door and saw a huge shadow. It was kind of crouched on its hands. I didn't really think it saw me, but it looked human. It didn't move for a whole 3 minutes before the shadow moved in the blink of an eye, and it was suddenly gone. I, nearly wetting myself, ran back to my room and called the cops. When they got there, they couldn't find anything, but they told me there was no way it was a person, since our back porch is suspended about 15 feet in the air, and there was no ladder. A few days passed, and it got me thinking. The loneliness was starting to get to me, so I decided to visit a friend, and I stayed at his house for 2 days for my safety. I spoke with my neighbor Graham, who's 84. I think it's important to say that during my walk to Graham's home, it takes me a good 10 minutes to get there, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I kept hearing leaves and sticks breaking, and I swear to God I heard my father's voice at one point, but it could have all been in my head. Once I got to Graham's home, everything was fine. He was a nice man, a widower. He had me come in and we spoke about normal things at first, and he told me how he missed having his grandkids over in the summer, and other things like that. Then, after a small conversation, I finally told him what had been happening. Of course, we talked about it being a bear or a rabid lynx, but the more I told him, the more nervous he got. He told me that in the late 60s, shortly after him and his wife had gotten married, her 17-year-old sister had gone missing in the woods. Apparently the cops never investigated before, as they believed she'd just run off and joined some hippie commune, which to them at the time made sense, but something that kind of freaked me out. He said I looked like she did, only with coloured hair. At this point I asked if he knew any of the lore of the area. He told me his grandma used to tell him stories, and that this land used to belong to her people before the colonizers took it, and she would tell him to never play outside during the winter, or the Whitaker would get him. He asked if I wanted to lay a few traps around the house, and I said yes. I even offered to pay him, but he turned me down. A true gentleman. Now I'm just really scared, as I don't know what a Whitaker is, or if someone could tell me, that'd be great. A few days passed, and I called Graham back. He asked me if I'd come home early, and I said no, and asked him why. He proceeded to tell me that on his walks to check the traps that he placed around the house, he saw someone in my bedroom window, and figured it was me getting some clothes. That's when I freaked out and drove over. Graham, who was armed, walked through the house. Nothing had been taken or moved, but something had been left on my bed. I spent the next few hours sobbing. I was too afraid to be in that house. I don't ever want to go back. We called the cops that did a sweep of the house, and they said it was probably just a vagrant. What do I even do? This thing got in my house. I took the picture of the driveway of my friend's apartment. I called my mum, and she thinks I'm overreacting, and even asked if I was smoking something. The audacity. I just feel so helpless. I spent the next 2 weeks jumping between friends' houses, couch surfing. But that no longer became an option, because it was when the COVID pandemic started and I had to quarantine at home. I was there for 72 hours and was already regretting not renting a hotel. Remember, at the time, we weren't supposed to be quarantined for that long, and I didn't think it would last all that. The tapping had gotten worse. I wish I'd have taken a few audio recordings. It easily lasted 15 minutes plus. I could no longer ask my friend to come over, Mr. Graham, since I didn't want to expose him if I had it. But he would text me every day to make sure I was fine. The trail cams and traps he set up hadn't yielded anything much besides pictures of wildlife and the occasional odd sound that we think is a voice whispering, but again could also be nothing. After a lot of research, I think this is a physical entity, but I don't know which one. Could it be a dogman, werewolf, Bigfoot, or a Wendigo? I'm really scared of getting into the house again, especially its little offerings that it left me, which I found out was made of red clay and freshwater nail shells and a piece of rock. I have vivid nightmares about it getting in or killing me. My parents are still in Canada. Because of the spikes in cases, they're not going to be able to get back much sooner. I'm just hoping to push this through until it loses interest in me. After an age, the harassment came to an end. One night, as always, I was home alone in the house when I heard something. I approached the stairs and I felt something attack me. I used my keys which I had on me and plunged them into the creature and then fled. I got free. I called the cops, and when they came there was no evidence. For the sake of not looking crazy or sounding it, I said it was a person, but of course it wasn't. I don't even know what it was. I have officially moved up since then, and I'm currently getting a new job and phone. My parents are stuck in Canada, and I think they will be for a while. I'm not going back, and haven't heard from Mr. Graham, and don't know if he's okay, and no longer have the means of going to check. A few years back, pre-COVID, I had agreed to meet up with some friends in the States to go on a road trip. There were a bunch of locations we wanted to hit up, most of them rural, and my friend had lots of experience driving through those areas. So off we went, having a merry time on the road. It was a very pleasant and overall enjoyable experience, being my first time in the States, but one thing happened one night that I don't think any of us will ever forget. We had definitely left it too late, choosing to have a late meal and chat for ages before we made it to our next destination. Problem was, one of our friends didn't exactly know how to get there, and the reception was really bad, so we were relying on maps and local knowledge to make our way there. It was around 2 a.m. at this point, and all of us were exhausted. The option to just pull up on the side of this road and hope for the best and try and sleep a few hours was discussed, but then declined. While we're driving slowly in the dark on this rural back road in the middle of I don't know where, suddenly we see a figure in our headlights. My friend thinks it's a deer and will just run off the road, and as we get closer it certainly looks like a deer. But as we get closer, it doesn't move, so my friend quickly pulls on the brakes because no one wants their car destroyed by a deer at 2 a.m. Suddenly, as we slowly pull up near the deer, the creature starts standing up on its hind legs. It turns its head and looks straight towards us, and I swear at that moment each member of the vehicle was about to crap themselves. I don't think I've ever felt such primal fear, because no one expected this thing to just stand up the way it did. It twisted its head to look at us, straight in the eyes it felt, and then bolted on back legs only into the woods. Safe to say, we drove extremely fast until we made it to our destination, and neither of us spoke about it the whole way there. In fact, barely any words have been shared about the whole ordeal in the years since, and I don't think anyone is particularly keen on talking about it. Something happened that night that none of us can explain. I just thought I'd share it with you, in case someone knows what the hell we saw that night. I've held on to this for years, and just haven't been able to ever come up with an explanation for it. When I was 6, my mum and I took a trip to Mexico to visit my grandparents. They lived in a small adobe house that was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains, rivers, and woods. It was beautiful, and I loved exploring the woods all day until the sun went down with my grandpa's 2 dogs. This particular day, the dogs and I would set out to explore as usual, but things were not about to go as they usually did. We set out at about 11 in the morning. We walked through the woods, occasionally ran into some stray chickens from nearby farms, collected sticks, stones, and whatever else I found interesting in that moment. And finally, I came upon this creek, where I found a small dead turtle. I had gone deeper into the woods that day than any other day, so this creek was new to me. So I decided to stop there and let the dogs get a drink and cool off while I played in the water. Once they had rested for a little bit, and I was done playing, I decided to continue further in and explore some more since it was still early. So we crossed the creek, and this is where things got strange. We crossed the creek, and the next thing I knew, we were behind a group of trees. The creek was not behind us anymore, so we had obviously walked far enough for it to have gone out of sight. But how? We had just crossed it a few seconds ago. At least, that is all I remember. Well, as we were behind these trees, I noticed the dogs staring intensely at something beyond the trees. So I decided to take a look. What I saw, I cannot explain to this day. I saw a bunch of tiny little beings that looked like tiny people. They were just walking around and did not seem to notice us. They looked like they could fit into the palm of your hand. Their skin was the color of normal skin, and they appeared to be wearing greenish-brownish colored clothing, or what I assumed to be clothing. They did not have hair. I just stared at them and remained hidden behind the trees. Luckily, my grandpa's dogs were so well trained that they would not make a sound or attack anything unless you made a specific sound that they understood, as you give them in order to attack. After observing them for a while, I decided to turn around and start walking back. Suddenly, the next thing I knew, I was crossing the creek again, heading out of the woods. Again. Like when I first crossed the creek to go into the woods, it was like my memory just stopped the moment I turned around to walk away, and fast-forwarded to me crossing the creek to leave. I have no memory of which path I took to reach the spot to where those tiny beings were, or what path I took to get back to the creek to be able to go home. Even stranger is that the sun was beginning to set when I crossed the creek to get back out, but it was barely 11 in the morning when we'd gone into the woods. So I lost hours of time. This is all I remember from that day. I'm 25 now, and have never been able to remember the parts that got lost. 10 years ago, in a little town outside of Toulouse, France, right after dark, we were waiting for a restaurant to open. Our big group of family, Americans, took a while to walk up a hill and look at the town graveyard from the road. Walking back, we could see the whole town below us, the road ahead lined with stone walls in front of houses. About 100 yards ahead, illuminated by the streetlight, I see a huge black dog-shaped thing leave our sidewalk, hop into the middle of the street, rise up on its hind legs, and quickly scale and disappear over the 8-foot stone wall opposite. There were cars, bushes, and gates to use for visual scale, and this thing was at least 7 to 8 feet tall. Picture the werewolf from the film Prisoner of Azkaban. Yep, that's it, spot on. My family was chattering away about whatever, but I said, "Did you see that?" And my son just nonchalantly goes, "Oh yeah, that was a werewolf." We walked by the spot a minute later, and everyone laughed. But I know what I saw. This happened when I was around 16 years old. I was in high school and living in my parents' ranch home in western Pennsylvania. For several weeks I would have a hard time falling asleep, because every time I did I would see this freakishly deformed black goat standing on 2 legs. It scared me, and I had several nightmares of this goat just slowly walking towards me. One night I was absolutely terrified, more so than usual. I decided to get up and use the restroom to see if that would help me relax and rest my brain so that I could try and get some shut-eye. I exited my bedroom. The living room was off to the right of the hallway, and I just stopped and froze solid. There, in the blackness of my parents' living room, with a minuscule amount of moonlight shining through the triangular windows, was the goat man. He stood about 6 foot tall. He was menacing and felt dominating and evil. The most messed up part about this goat man was his front legs or arms. I don't even know what to call them as he stood on his hind legs, but his hands were hooves, but his elbows were broken. His hooves were upside down facing the ceiling, and he was moving slowly but in a dancing, swaying kind of way. I just dipped back into my room and closed my eyes and hid under the covers. I couldn't force myself to scream or face it any longer. I guess I just chose to ignore it. Luckily, I haven't seen this creature since, but I've told all of my friends and family about it. They, of course, think it's hilarious, but I do think they believe me. They will bring it up in conversations as a joke from time to time, and laugh because they know it scares me. I know they mean well, but even a 28-year-old still gets goosebumps and the occasional tear to my eye, and I hope I never have a run-in with it again. About 10 years ago, my boyfriend and I were in bed sleeping. He jerked awake and started inching up towards the headboard, which woke me. He was making scared moans and was looking at the foot of our bed. I looked at where he was looking and saw a short man with frizzly hair and a pig snout and jowls staring at him. Not me, him. He started screaming to turn on the light, and I was reaching over to do that when it lunged at him and made a weird grunting noise. I turned the light on, and when I did, it vanished. We started talking about what we saw. I would say he had frizzy hair, and he said yes, a pig snout and jowls. Our descriptions matched perfectly. I felt this wave of absolute malevolence rolling off this creature and towards my boyfriend, not at me but at him. We tried to recreate it with lights and shadows but couldn't. We slept in the living room that night. We didn't leave the house. I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't know what else to think, and I still get goosebumps thinking or writing about it. I haven't told my current boyfriend because I don't want to scare him. I'm still in the building, and I haven't felt that evil thing since my ex-boyfriend moved out. We have dense woods behind my house, and one evening I hear a dog barking up a storm. I ran outside to see what it was, and near our grapevine stood this wolf-like creature that was about the size of a bear. I freaked out when it made eye contact with me. It just stood there about 10 yards away, staring. I grabbed my dog and ran inside to tell my parents. They wrote it off as my imagination, since I was about 10 to 12 at the time. But since then, when I go into the woods, it feels like I'm being watched. I'm 17 now, and still have a vivid memory of it.
A few years ago, I was riding in the back seat of a car with my boyfriend, with his two friends up in the front. We were driving through the back roads in the Catskills at night, with winding roads surrounded by forests and no streetlights. At some point I noticed a figure to my left, at the side of the road. It ran parallel to the vehicle for a moment, and then cut across the road immediately in front of the vehicle. The problem was, this thing was transparent, as in literally predator style. It seemed to have 4 legs and was about the height of a deer torso, but its legs were bulkier than that of a deer. It almost had a hunched over sort of gait. I knew I saw it, however impossible it may seem, and I knew the driver saw it because he braked. I knew the front passenger saw it because I saw him turn his head while the thing crossed the road. Still, I was sitting there questioning whether I should comment or not, because what the hell? When my boyfriend spoke up and asked, "Did you guys see that?" So we all saw it. And to this day, it remains one of the strangest outdoor experiences I have ever had.
Me, my 2 brothers, and his girlfriend were out enjoying a beautiful sunset at one of the many beautiful nature spots we enjoyed going to. There was a lake there, so my brothers were fishing off the edge as we sat and made a fire and watched. We had been there quite a while. It was starting to get kind of dark now, and usually that means it's really dark inside the woods, and we still needed to walk back to the car. So as we were getting ready to go, everything got dead silent. It was odd. Birds had gone quiet. The sound of squirrels had stopped. Woodchucks, everything. Silence. Out of nowhere, we began hearing howling and yipping from coyotes. They didn't sound too far off. It sounded like there could have been 20 of them. My brother picked up his 12 gauge, and he told us all to move quickly. If the coyotes were hungry and in a big pack, it could mean trouble. We were in full sprint back to the car, and the coyotes sounded like they were getting ever closer. At one point, it felt like they were right on our tail. It was pretty scary. Although, at the time it seemed like they were after us, but it got me thinking, perhaps they were running from something. Because no coyotes attacked us when we'd stopped to get to the car, and there were 4 of us, and we had to stop to open the doors. If they were after us, they could have easily taken one of us at that point, but right as we reached the car, it sounded as though they made a turn and left, and went running off in a different direction. We were too spooked to check and wanted to get the hell out of there. On our way home, we have this little pull-off that runs parallel to the main road. My brother noticed a little sign made by hand in the woods that said, Werewolf Hollow. Mind you, we've lived here all our lives and have never seen this sign before. So at the entrance is a turning, and my brother decides to take it out of curiosity. Along this pull-off is a guardrail. Behind the guardrail is a good 70-foot drop to a sheep farm in our area. As we rounded the turn and could no longer see where we had just come from, do we see this creature, big, hairy, with pointed ears like that of a German shepherd, piercing greenish-yellow eyes. Its hands seemed to hang down to its knees, and it appeared to be at least 8 foot tall, hunched over. As we came around the bend, my brother stopped in the middle of the road, this thing looking at our headlights while we were still trying to make sense of what we were seeing. It didn't look like a bear. What the hell else could it have been? After a few seconds, this thing turns back around, takes one hand and lifts itself off the ground and drops the 70 feet down in the guardrail in one swift motion. We were all too creeped out at that point and sped home. The next day, my brother and I went down to the farm at the bottom of the 70-foot drop to see if the thing had survived the jump. We told them that we had seen something and asked if we could walk to the edge of the property to find the remains of what had fallen. As we walked, the farmer was telling us about how sheep had been coming up dead with their throats torn out, and said it was the strangest thing because most game in the area hunt food to eat, and these attacks seemed vicious, without purpose. He also told us that they had had the saliva tested around one of the sheep, and it tested positive for an unknown canine. The wood sign at the entrance of the pool was gone as well when we had gone back during the day. We all saw this same thing. It definitely wasn't a hallucination. Does anyone have any suggestions? It has been itching at the back of my mind for too long now, and has been plaguing my nightmares for months.
I spent a lot of my free time urban exploring. If you're not familiar with the concept, it involves finding abandoned buildings and, well, exploring them, as the name suggests. I know it doesn't sound like much fun, but living in an old college town, there isn't much fun to be had. See, I like to collect old relics. For example, recently I was exploring the old courthouse that was abandoned after they built a new one, and I found an old gavel. They're sort of like trophies for me. I was never very athletic or excelled in school, so I don't have a shelf of golden athletes captured in the middle of nicking or throwing a ball, or framed certificates recognizing high grades. These were the old souvenirs I liked to show off. I usually do this alone, since no one in my small circle of friends is interested in this sort of thing. They tell me that it's creepy, and they're afraid to go into old buildings at night. I tell them I always have a flashlight with me, and plenty of batteries for backup, but that doesn't seem to bring them any comfort. I think I've seen too many scary movies, but don't get me wrong, I love the horror genre, but I don't take any of that to heart. I don't believe in the supernatural or ghosts or spooky things like that. I like to go at night because it provides plenty of cover in case the local police department decides they want to do some exploring of their own. Like I said earlier, I live in an old college town, and being of college age, you would think it would be easier to meet like-minded people that share the same sort of interests as I do. Apparently I've discovered a niche when it comes to hobbies. That was until I met Harlan. I noticed her eating alone in our school dining hall and decided to try and strike up a conversation with her. I asked if I could sit down with her, and she reluctantly accepted with what I thought was an eye roll. Either way, I took my seat and began asking her my best get-to-know-you questions. It was exactly what you would expect given our surroundings. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? She was nice enough and answered my lame questions and returned a few of her own.
I discovered she was from East Texas and came here to study music to become a band director for any high school that would hire her, as she put it. She was desperate to get out of her small town and move to the city where she would never have to see a pine tree again. I thought things were going really well, and then she asked me what my hobbies were. If I'm honest, I figured this would be where the conversation came to an end. I answered her question with barely any eye contact and some stammering. I told her about exploring and my collection of trophies, and to my surprise, she seemed kind of interested. She told me back home she was into paranormal investigations. I feigned interest, since I think all of that is bullshit to begin with, but she had pretty eyes and an amazing smile, and I guess my acting was pretty convincing since she asked if I wanted to join her soon on one of her investigations. I didn't really say yes, but I didn't say no either. I asked her where she was interested in going next, and she asked me if I'd ever heard of Goatman Bridge. I'd lived near this town my whole life. Of course I'd heard of Goatman's Bridge. I've just never been there. If you aren't familiar with this local legend, I'll fill you in. The story goes that there was a goat farmer by the name of Oscar Washburn in the 1930s, who made a living by selling meat, milk, cheese, and hides. He apparently did really well for himself and his family, and this did not settle well with the local KKK. You had to cross what is known as the Old Alton Bridge to get to his farm. So to help his business, Washburn posted a sign on the bridge that read, "This way to the Goat Man." Well, this must have been the final straw for the local assholes, because late one night they broke into his home, dragged him to the old bridge where they had a noose waiting for him, and mercilessly tightened the noose around his neck and flung him over the side of the bridge. When they went down to the riverbank below to confirm their murderous deed, they found nothing but the empty noose and undisturbed waters. Confused and still in a blind rage, they went back to Oscar's farm and burnt it to the ground with his family still inside. Oscar's body was never found or seen again. My cell phone rang later that night, and honestly I was kind of surprised to see it was Harlan. I tried to answer with my smoothest, "Hey, how's it going?" She laughed at my attempt and told me she was going to Goatman Bridge and wanted to know if I would like to join her. I told her I was free as I closed my textbook and put my homework on pause. She told me she would be at my place in 20 minutes, so I got dressed, grabbed my backpack in case I found any souvenirs. My hopes were low for this, but you never know. I hadn't told Harlan yet that I didn't believe in the paranormal or a spiritual realm, whatever you want to call it. I figured I would let her know about my skepticism at a later date. I get a text letting me know that she's waiting for me outside, so I head out the door and get into her car, throwing my bag into the back seat. As soon as she starts driving to the destination of Goatman's Bridge, she begins to unload about how excited she is for this. There's nothing like this back in East Texas. It's all haunted houses with tales of Confederate soldiers or someone's dead grandma lurking in the attic. How boring. So what are you hoping to find? Are you kidding? I want to see the Goat Man. See him? I thought you just said that seeing old dead spirits is boring. She shoots me an eye glance. I thought you knew all about the legend. She sarcastically mocked. I gave her a confused glance. She rolled her eyes and explained that this one is different. She said that she's never hunted a vengeful spirit before, and she believes they're easier to communicate with. But if his body was never found, then how are you sure there's even a spirit to communicate with? She went on to explain that something happens that's beyond our understanding when someone is murdered, and with that much hate, a piece of them is left behind that wants revenge. And exactly why would you want to mess with someone who's that angry? I ask, surprising myself that I'm even entertaining the thought that a ghost can hold a grudge. Spirits can't hurt the living, she stated. We had to take a back road since the bridge had been shut down ever since they built a new one, and we parked at the orange and white roadblock and got out of the car to make the trek to the bridge. It was dark. I know that's an obvious statement, but this was a kind of dark I hadn't seen before.
I could see the stars that I'd never seen before, but I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, as did Harlan from hers. We turned them on with what seemed like the loudest click my flashlight has ever made, and that's when I noticed how silent it was. I couldn't hear any wind or animals or crickets chirping. It was eerie to say the least. "What's in your bag?" I asked Harlan to break the silence. "Oh, just some EVP equipment, thermal cameras, just some basic ghost hunting tools." "Sounds like you're ready to start your own TV show," I chuckled. If looks could kill, I would have been dead where I stood. She didn't appreciate that one. Those shows are all BS. They don't know what they're doing. I could see she was passionate about this, so I didn't push it any further. Then, she fixed her flashlight on the old bridge. Her pace increased, and I tried to keep up as she reached it before I could. This was your typical old bridge, concrete road with steel beams coming up and over the road in a crisscross pattern. I couldn't tell if the beams were supposed to be red or just rusted over time. I scanned the bridge for the "this way to the goat band" sign I was hoping for, but no luck. I noticed Harlan reached for her cell phone in her back pocket. "Just in time," she said with a smile on her face. "Just in time for what?" "Just in time to summon the goat man," she said with way more enthusiasm than I expected. Summon? I thought it was just some ghost that hung around the bridge. "You're making this sound like a demon or something." I began feeling a bit uneasy. "What, are you scared?" Harlan asked with a smile across her face. "Look, these things usually end up being nothing. Best case scenario, we pick up an EVP or catch something on my thermal camera." "Okay. Well, how do you summon the goat man?" I was poorly hiding my nervousness in my voice. "The legend says that if you knock 3 times on the steel beam exactly at midnight, he'll appear." I look at my phone to see that we're about 5 minutes from midnight. Harlan begins unpacking some equipment from her bag. She sets her thermal camera up on a tripod facing the opposite direction from which we approach the bridge. She turns on some special voice recorder, and I tried explaining it to me, but I didn't really follow what she was saying. She checks the camera one more time to make sure it's just right. She approaches one of the now ominous-looking red steel beams with her phone in one hand and the other balled into a fist and raised just above her head, waiting to strike the steel at exactly midnight. I'm standing a few feet away from her, frozen with uncertainty about what's about to happen. The eerie silence is suddenly broken when Harlan knocks 3 times on the steel beam, each resounding with an echoing metallic bang that seems to go on forever. We both hold our breath, waiting for something to happen, but we only hear more silence. I start to move my flashlight off of Harlan towards the surrounding trees. I turn in a full circle before returning my flashlight back to her, and I can see the disappointment written all over her face. I start to suggest that we go hit a bar and let me buy her a few drinks, but I barely get the words out my mouth before we hear a loud crack in the trees. The kind of sound you hear when something heavy steps on a dried twig. We both jumped and trained our flashlights on where the sound came from, yet for some reason we were facing the opposite direction from each other. I was facing the east side of the bridge and she the west. We both exchanged confused glances as to how this could have happened. Why was she facing the other direction when clearly the sound was from behind me? I wish that had remained the worst thing about this experience, but things got worse, way worse. While we were trying to figure out why the other one was wrong, we heard the most grim sound come from all around us. It started quietly at first and grew louder and louder. It was the scream of a goat, but not just a goat. It sounded like a goat and a man was screaming together at the same time, but from the same source, as if they were one. I kept trying to figure out which direction the sound was coming from, but the more I moved across the bridge, the more the screams seemed to move with me, like the sound was coming from the east and the west side of the bridge at the same time. Harlan and I seemed to meet in the middle of the bridge just behind her camera. That's when all the screaming seemed to meet at the same location. We both spun around to train our flashlights on the sound, and that's when we saw him, or whatever this thing was. It was a man, well at least the body was, and there were 2 legs, a torso, and 2 arms with human hands on each end, all of which were covered in muscles that seemed to flex and retract with every breath this thing took. Its breathing was loud, much louder than any human I've ever heard, but that may be due to the fact that this thing did not have the head of a human. Instead, sitting on top of this thing's shoulders was the head of a goat, and not a small goat. This thing was in proportion to the rest of its body. The fur was deep black with solid eyes to match. 2 massive horns protruded from its skull and pointed towards the back of its head. 2 large ears just sat beneath its horns, jutting straight out. The most disturbing thing about all of this had to be where the goat head met the human body. It seemed to have been crudely stitched together. Each point where the needle would have met skin was still bleeding, as if it had recently been created or the wounds just never healed. I noticed Harlan was no longer watching the beast, but instead looking down at her thermal camera to see if it was picking this up. I could see her eyes widen when she realized it was. Something like this would make her famous, and most likely ignite the world of paranormal investigation. Our attention was quickly taken away from the camera and focused back on the goat man when it let out another horrifying scream, its mouth wide, exposing its long yellow teeth and lengthy black tongue. When it finished its deafening scream, it charged towards us. I immediately turned and bolted for the car. Harlan, however, tried to grab her camera before running away. "Leave it!" I screamed, just as she picked up the camera and turned to run. The goat man grabbed her by the back of the neck with a grip that she would not have been able to break free from. I thought he would come for me too, but he just stopped and stared at me, with Harlan writhing and screaming in his grasp. I stood frozen, wanting to help her but knowing there was nothing I could do. I didn't carry weapons with me, and I don't think weapons would help in a situation like this. She locked eyes with me with this face that I'll never forget. Her face conveyed a look of pure terror that I've never seen before. The goat man quickly turned and ran back to the woods, dragging her behind him. Her screams got worse when she realized there was a fate coming that we were both unsure of. I know the sensible thing would have been to get into the car and drive far away from here, but I couldn't bring myself to leave without her. I started chasing after Harlan and the goat man, crossing the bridge and heading into the woods. There was no path to follow, so all I was doing was following her screams. I ran for what felt like an eternity, but I could feel my lungs burning and my sides beginning to cramp. I could hear the screaming getting closer and louder, so I must have been heading in the right direction even though I had lost all sense of it. I came to an abrupt halt when I entered a small clearing. Oh God, what I saw next nearly made me puke. In the clearing was one giant oak tree surrounded by what must have been a dozen of these goat people holding torches and making the same noise the goat man was making on the bridge. Except these weren't screams like we heard earlier, but more like a chanting, as if I had stumbled into some sort of ritual. Sitting upright at the base of the tree was Harlan, but she was no longer screaming. In fact, she was no longer doing anything at all. I couldn't tell if she was dead or just unconscious, her body limp against the tree. I saw one of these goat people enter the circle walking towards her, and I realized it was the one we saw on the bridge. He wasn't holding a torch like the others. He was holding up the head of a goat, like it was a prized possession. The chanting seemed to get louder and faster the closer he got to her. When he was standing over her unconscious body, he brought the goat's head down with enough force to make Harlan's head disappear inside of it, as if she was wearing a Halloween mask. When he reached the tip of one of the horns and snapped off a piece of a couple of inches long and began to sew the severed head onto Harlan's skin. There seemed to be some sort of sinewy thread attached to the end as he broke it off, and I could hear the sickening sound of his horn piercing her skin, and this thread being pulled through the wound. When he was finished, he put the thread in his mouth and used his teeth to bite off the sinew. He stuffed what was left back into his horn. The chanting from the onlooking goat people grew to the level where it seemed to be coming from all around. The goat man placed his hand on Harlan's forehead, or what was now her forehead, and let out a deep guttural yell. As I watched her body come to life slowly, her hands feeling her new goat head, she let out what seemed like a scream of sadness and disbelief. Her mouth, open, revealed the same rotting teeth and black tongue. She slowly rose to her feet and took in her surroundings and what I assumed was her new family. Her head jerked towards me as she pointed in my direction. They all turned to look at me, and I knew I had to get out of there. I wasted no time in turning and running away as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if I was heading in the right direction, but I could hear their voices in the distance behind me, and I just kept running. I couldn't let them turn me into one of those things. I somehow found the bridge again and realized that I could no longer hear them behind me. I raced to Harlan's car and jumped inside. Thank God she left the keys in the ignition. The engine came to life with a roar and I threw it into drive and took off. I didn't stop for any red lights nor stop signs. It was late at this point, so there wasn't anyone on the road anyway. I drove back to my place, and now I'm sharing this with you to make sure no one tries to find the Goat Man. No matter what you hear, stay away from the bridge. I'm still shaking and can't calm down. See, the thing is, and maybe I'm just going crazy, but I swear if I'm really quiet, I can hear a goat's bleat in the distance. I was out hunting with my older brother and his best friend a few years back. I want to say 2016. We had been walking along a trail a good 5 kilometers. On one side of the trail is a decent drop, and then a river, and then on the other side is a decent uphill section with a huge pine forest. It was about 1 a.m. at this point, and we were just sort of quietly talking to each other, when a horrific noise split the air. We all froze and looked at each other with confused expressions on our faces. We knew it came from the pine forest, and where we were there weren't any big predators, or really anything out there that we should be afraid of. So we shouldered our rifles and headed up to find out what exactly made the sound. I wish we hadn't. We got to a clearing, and the trees were thinning out, and my brother flicked on his spotlight. Big, bright, excellent range. Way up ahead of us was the strangest looking figure I've ever seen, like the general shape of a wolf, but off. It was just stopped on the edge of another tree line further up the hill, looking right at us, pacing side to side. My brother's friends and I had our rifles trained on it while trying to get a look. We couldn't count out the fact that it could be another hunter's dog that was lost, so we, against my gut feeling, went up after it. And as we did, it became increasingly obvious this thing was watching us very intently. The closer we got, the more we realized it definitely wasn't a hunter's dog. It was big, real big, and the way it moved and its entire demeanor was oh so unsettling. We kept 2 rifles on it, and 1 in the opposite direction. We slowly made our way back down and haven't been back there since. I really don't like talking about it, as we still don't know what we saw, and people usually jump to the BS conclusion because, as I said before, where we live there really isn't any big predators.
When I was younger, around 7 or 8 years old, I used to sleep with my parents in their bed. Their bedroom had a computer room with a window looking out to the driveway and up the cul-de-sac. One night, it was just me and my dad sleeping in the bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked out the window and saw a car with its high beam lights on, pulling all the way into our driveway. I awoke my dad and told him someone was in the driveway. He went to check, as well as I, and there were no cars anywhere. He said I just dreamt it. I know I didn't, but I didn't bother making a fuss. We went back to sleep. The same night, I woke up and saw a car out on the street with its lights on, illuminating the street in front of it. I got up and looked out the window, and someone was standing there. A very tall man was standing in front of the car, motionless in front of the headlights. I was so confused. I looked out the window for a few minutes before getting back into bed. I had no idea why the man was standing out there, and I had no idea why the car's headlights were facing him. Now this is where it gets weird. I sometimes sleep alone, admittedly scared because my parents weren't there. For some reason I was able to sleep in that eerie room sometimes,
but it always made me uncomfortable. One night, I had my first and only experience with sleep paralysis. Funnily enough, I woke up, noticed I couldn't move, and went back to sleep. There were no demons on top of me or anything I could see in the room, and when I fell back asleep I had a dream of a tall, thin, purple figure standing over me. It had very large human-like eyes that were staring at me. I knew it wasn't human. It stood there for a while, and I was confused and curious. The figure then leaned over my bed and dissipated into the bed at the end of my feet. To this day, I think it was a form of an extraterrestrial being. It had to have been correlated to the first previous event, the car pulling into the driveway, the strange man standing out on the street. As I'm writing this, I'm not entirely sure if it was a car illuminating the tall man, or if that car was actually a UFO pulling into the driveway, which beamed lights towards our house. What I do know is that I think a lot about it. Now, this story takes a turn. I'm diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, which can switch over into psychosis if I become too manic. I've suffered from a psychotic break 3.5 years ago and lost my mind, during which I thought I could speak to aliens, and I couldn't stop reading religious texts. One day I was in my basement, going through the psychosis, and could see pink, blue and yellow lights shining through my basement window. Now you might be thinking it was the sun reflecting through the window. It was a windy, cloudy day, and the sun kept peeking through the clouds, causing the visual perception of lights to flicker in the window. Right? Well, why were there colourful lights moving in swirls and showing geometric patterns? There was a thin piece of white cardboard covering the window, so I could see exactly where the lights were hitting. The cardboard was translucent enough to see these strange shapes shifting. I went to the window, took off the cardboard, and there was nothing. The lights had vanished, and all I could see were the clouds moving quickly due to how windy it was, and the sun peeking through repeatedly, causing a flickering effect. I'm well aware that I could have been hallucinating, but there is another part of the story that makes it even more interesting. For some strange reason, I was making videos of myself joking around and being somewhat childish. But it was disturbing because I was 18 at the time, and I rewatched one of the videos and heard a disoriented moan. I did not make that sound. It came as if someone had made a moan through the microphone. It sounded like it came from an electronic device. I later deleted the video after I came back to reality. The videos were so unimaginably cringy that I deleted the lot of them. Before the psychosis had begun, I went on a nighttime walk with my mother. As we turned a corner for about a second, I saw blue glowing light in the sky. It looked as big as the size of a dinner plate. That's how close it was. As I began to point to it, I turned to my mother, asking her if she sees it. As my mother turned towards me and asked me what I was talking about, the UFO retreated into the night sky, like it only wanted me to see it. I told my mother what I saw, and she gave me a concerned look. I laughed in excitement, because my dad had recently told me about a UFO he saw when he was younger. After that experience, I went psychotic. These events I experienced as a child, and the UFO encounters I had are 100% real to me. I believe in aliens, and I believe I was contacted. I'm 21 now and haven't seen anything since. I'm properly medicated and attend therapy now. I'm more stable than I've ever been. If any aliens are hearing this, I hope you guys weren't the ones that gave me this mental illness.